What's up guys? Welcome to Supreme Harry. We've got something special today. What if Goblin Curse Breaker scanned Harry at age 5 and discovered 100 illegal soul bindings drain magic for Dumbledore's Phoenix Order? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Scan. The thing about Gringotts was that it didn't smell like magic. Harry had expected it to, the way Petunia's church smelled like candles and old wood, the way the library on Magnolia Crescent smelled like paper and dust, places that meant something always had a smell to them. But Gringotts smelled like cold metal and stone and something faintly mineral, like a river running deep underground. It smelled like the inside of the earth. Harry stood just inside the enormous bronze doors and breathed it in while Petunia argued with herself 3 feet behind him about whether she'd actually locked the car. She hadn't noticed he'd walked in. That was the thing about being 5 and small and wearing Dudley's old clothes. Everything hung off him like a deflated tent, and he moved quietly because quiet was safer, and adults who were busy arguing with themselves rarely tracked where a small quiet boy went. Harry had learned this the way he'd learned most things, by necessity. The hall was enormous. Marble floors white as bone stretched out in every direction, and behind a long polished counter, creatures worked with an industry that was almost violent in its efficiency. They were small, shorter than Petunia but nothing like children, with long clever fingers and eyes that caught the torchlight like coins at the bottom of a well. They moved paper and quills and odd brass instruments with the practiced speed of people who considered stopping a personal failure. Harry walked further in. Nobody stopped him. One of the creatures glanced at him from behind a particularly tall ledger, took him in with a single swift look, and returned to its work. Not ignored, assessed, catalogued, dismissed as low priority. Harry found he didn't mind. Being dismissed was familiar territory. He made it almost to the center of the hall before he stopped in front of a pillar and looked up. There were words carved into the marble above the main counter, and Harry squinted at them, working through the letters the way he'd taught himself, reading the words the teachers at his preschool seemed surprised he already knew. Enter, stranger, but take heed, you are not supposed to be in here. The voice came from slightly below his eye level and slightly to his left. Harry turned. The creature standing there was older than the ones behind the counter, he could tell because the others moved like water and this one moved like bedrock, deliberate and unhurried, as if speed was something that happened to lesser beings. He was wearing robes that were a deep charcoal gray rather than the bronze-buttoned uniforms the others wore, and he had a pair of brass-rimmed spectacles pushed up onto his head that he clearly wasn't using for seeing. His eyes were sharp enough without them. There are wards, the creature continued, studying Harry with an expression of professional neutrality, that are specifically designed to redirect lost human children back to their parents. You walked through 3 of them. Harry considered this. Did they not work? They worked perfectly. A pause. You walked through them anyway. Another pause, this one longer, with a quality to it that Harry didn't have a word for yet. He would later learn the word was assessment. I'm Ragnok, the creature said. I am a Senior Curse Breaker. Bloodline and Inheritance Division. He looked at Harry the way Harry had sometimes seen the woman at the doctor's office look at his chart, not at him but at something overlaid on top of him, something only she could read. And you, small human, are producing a magical signature that has no business existing in a 5-year-old child. Harry looked down at himself, then back up. Is that bad? Sit down, Ragnok said, which wasn't an answer. There was a bench nearby that Harry hadn't noticed, dark wood and very old, pushed against the base of the pillar. He sat. Ragnok pulled a small brass instrument from somewhere in his robes. It was shaped a bit like a compass but with too many hands, each one moving independently, and held it out toward Harry without touching him. The instrument went insane. All the hands started spinning. Several of them spun so fast they became blurs. One of them, thin as a wire and painted red, stopped dead and began trembling. A sound came out of the instrument that Harry could only describe as distressed, a tight, high keening that Ragnok silenced immediately by flipping a small cover over the face of the device. He was very still for a moment. Stay here, he said. Okay, Harry said. Ragnok walked to the counter with the same unhurried stride, but Harry, who had learned to read adults the way other children read picture books, noticed that his hands were moving very slightly faster than the rest of him. He spoke to one of the other creatures in a language Harry didn't know, something guttural and precise, and the creature behind the counter looked up, looked at Harry, and then looked back at Ragnok with an expression that might have been alarm. Harry waited. He was good at waiting. He'd had a lot of practice. Petunia came through the bronze doors in a rush of indignation and relief. Harry James Potter, what do you think you're, and stopped because there was suddenly a goblin in front of her, half her height and twice her air of authority, holding up one hand. Your ward, the goblin said, is currently engaged in a diagnostic consultation. You will be notified when it is complete. Petunia opened her mouth. The goblin looked at her. Petunia closed her mouth. This was impressive, Harry thought. He'd never seen anyone successfully do that before. How long will it, you will be notified, the goblin repeated, in the tone of someone explaining gravity to someone who'd complained about it, when it is complete. Petunia sat down on a different bench near the door and clutched her handbag and said nothing further, which was the most interesting thing Harry had seen all day, and he'd walked through 3 magical wards. Ragnok returned with 2 other goblins, both carrying larger instruments, and behind them came a goblin so old that age seemed to have distilled him down to something fundamental. All the inessential parts burned away and only the core left, eyes like black glass and hands that were steady as stone. Bone Breaker, Ragnok said quietly. Chief Healer. I know what I am, Bone Breaker said, and looked at Harry. Hold still, boy. I'm already still, Harry pointed out. Bone Breaker looked at him for a moment with an expression Harry couldn't quite read. Then he raised the instrument he was carrying. This one was larger, bowl-shaped like a birdbath but made of something dark green that Harry didn't think was stone, and held it level with Harry's chest. The bowl filled with light. Not the warm gold of a lamp or the white flicker of a fluorescent tube, this was a light that had color inside it the way deep water has color, layers of it, and as Harry watched, the layers separated. Most of it was a deep, fierce blue that pulsed like a heartbeat and made the air around it feel charged. But threaded through it, wrapped around it like wire around a battery, were lines of something gray-green and thin, and Harry could count them if he tried. He started counting. He got to 30 before Bone Breaker lowered the bowl and said something in gobbledygook that Ragnok answered in the same language. The exchange was short and had the texture of an argument. What does it mean? Harry asked. They both looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them seemed used to being directly addressed by the subject of a diagnostic. It means, Ragnok said, after a moment that felt like a decision, that there are bindings on your magic. Many of them. They were placed there intentionally, and they are drawing your magical energy away from you and channeling it somewhere else. Harry thought about this carefully. Like stealing? Ragnok looked at Bone Breaker. Bone Breaker looked at Ragnok. Yes, Ragnok said. Like stealing. How many? Harry asked. Another look passed between them, dense with something Harry would later recognize as surprise, not at the bindings, but at him. 112, Bone Breaker said. His voice had a weight to it, like a judge reading a sentence. We have never seen a number like this on a living magical person. Most people die before it reaches a third of that. Harry looked at the gray-green threads in the fading light of the bowl. 112. He counted up to 30 again in his head, tried to imagine more than 3 times that. He had a sudden vivid image of 112 straws all stuck in a glass, all drinking at once, and the glass never getting any emptier because something kept refilling it faster than it could be drained, barely. Can you take them off? He asked. It will take time, Bone Breaker said. The bindings are complex. Some are layered on top of others. Removing them incorrectly would damage your magical core permanently. He paused. Some would take months to safely remove. The total process may take years. Okay, Harry said. Ragnok studied him for another moment. You are not going to ask who did this? Harry looked up at him. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. The silence that followed was different from the others. Harry wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. He picked at a loose thread on his too large sleeve and waited for someone to say something. It was Bonebreaker who spoke. We do not yet have the full picture. The bindings are tied to a channeling network. Whoever placed them is receiving the stolen magic, yes, but tracing the threads takes time and access that we are still working to obtain. He looked at Harry over the rim of his instruments with a steadiness that felt, peculiarly, like respect. What I can tell you is that this was not an accident. This was not the residue of protective magic or an unintended consequence of a charm. Every one of these bindings was placed deliberately, with expert knowledge, and with the specific intention of suppressing your abilities and redirecting the energy. They are, Ragnok added, of a variety that requires both exceptional skill and access to very old, very restricted texts. This is not the work of a back-alley curse caster. Harry nodded. He stored this information carefully, the way he stored things that mattered, not in the part of his mind where he kept Dudley's punching patterns and which stairs creaked and which of Petunia's moods meant dinner would be late, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere that felt like it would last. There's another thing, Ragnok said. He had not sat down. He seemed constitutionally opposed to sitting down in front of a problem. He stood with his arms folded and looked at Harry with the expression of someone about to say something that required being said properly. You walked through 3 misdirection wards. The wards are calibrated to the average magical signature of children your age. Which means that even suppressed, even with 112 bindings siphoning your magic as we speak, your core is strong enough to override standard deflection charms as if they weren't there. He paused. Without those bindings, Harry Potter, I am not certain there is a measurement we currently have that would accurately describe what you are. Harry looked at the floor for a moment. The marble was cold and white and very clean. He looked back up. Will you help me? He asked. Not pleading, simply asking, with the directness of someone who had never learned to approach needs with anything other than practicality, because softening a request had never, in his experience, made it more likely to be granted. Ragnok unfolded his arms. He reached into his robes and produced a piece of parchment and a quill that he handed to the younger goblin, who began writing rapidly. Gringotts, he said, is not in the business of charity. We are in the business of accounts, contracts, and the law. He met Harry's eyes. But we are also in the business of correcting illegal actions that occur within the bounds of the wizarding financial system. What has been done to you is not only a crime under Goblin law, it is a violation of wizarding inheritance statutes, blood rights, and the Magical Beings Protection Charter of 1689. A beat. There are a great many laws being broken here. Gringotts has both the right and the obligation to intervene. He said it like the law was a weapon he knew how to hold. Also, Bonebreaker said, with the air of someone making a secondary but relevant observation, whoever did this made their transfers through a network that connects to Gringotts' registered vaults. He held Harry's gaze. That makes it our business in the most direct possible sense. Harry nodded slowly. Okay. There is paperwork, Ragnok said. There are always contracts. Goblin law requires them. You are 5 years old, which under wizarding law makes you a minor, but under Goblin law, a person who can demonstrate comprehension of a contract may sign one regardless of age. He looked at Harry steadily. Can you read? Yes. Can you read contracts? I don't know. I've never seen one. Then we will teach you. He said it with complete seriousness, as if teaching a 5-year-old to read legal documents was a perfectly ordinary afternoon agenda, which for a Goblin curse breaker in the middle of uncovering a century-class crime against a child, Harry supposed it was. You will come back tomorrow. And the day after. We will begin the first removal when Bonebreaker has mapped the full structure of the bindings. We will educate you as we go. A pause. You will not tell anyone about this. Not the woman currently terrorizing my colleague near the door. Not any adult you know. Not your teachers. Harry almost smiled at that. Who would I tell? Ragnok looked at him for just a moment, not the assessment look this time, but something he couldn't put a label on, and then turned to the younger goblin. Pull the Potter inheritance file. Full bloodline scan, vault audit, and property ledger. I want everything. He looked back at Harry. Gringotts will appoint an account manager. His name is Griphook. He is competent, occasionally personable, and will handle the practical elements of your accounts and estate. I have an estate. You have several. The corner of Ragnok's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. Someone has been managing them on your behalf without your knowledge or consent. The gray-green threads in the bow light came back to Harry, all those thin lines, all that quiet theft. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about Dudley's second bedroom full of broken toys and Harry sleeping under the coats. He thought about wearing clothes 3 sizes too large and being told to be grateful. He felt something settle in his chest. Not anger, he'd feel anger later, when he understood enough to direct it. Right now what he felt was something colder and more useful. Clarity. I see, he said. There is one more thing, Bonebreaker said, and something in his voice made the air feel different. He reached into the folds of his robes and produced a small glass vial, sealed with gold wax, containing something that caught the light in a way that had nothing to do with the torches. This is what your magic looked like before the bindings registered on my instrument. Just the first pulse of it, before we triggered the suppression response. He held it out to Harry. I want you to keep it. Not for sentiment. So you remember what belongs to you. Harry took the vial. The light inside it was the deep, fierce blue, the same color he'd seen at the center of the layered glow, before the gray-green threads had pulled at it. It was warm in his palm. He closed his fingers around it and put it in his pocket. Petunia was waiting by the door when Harry came back across the marble floor. She was doing the thing she did when she was frightened, which was to look like she was furious instead. Her face was pinched and her handbag was clutched to her chest like a shield, and she looked at him with the specific expression she reserved for moments when Harry had reminded her that he was wrong in some way she couldn't fix. What on earth were you doing? Nothing, Harry said. I just walked in. The door was open. It wasn't nothing, obviously. She probably knew that. But she also didn't want to know what it actually was, which was the cornerstone of Petunia's relationship with anything uncomfortable, and so she made the noise she made and grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the exit. At the door, Harry glanced back. Ragnok was standing exactly where he'd been, watching. Not warmly, not the way a person would watch a child they felt sorry for. More the way a craftsman might watch a block of marble he'd just agreed to work on. Assessing potential. Planning cuts. Harry gave him a small nod. Ragnok inclined his head. Then Harry was through the doors and back on the street in the London sunshine, walking beside Petunia, who was already lecturing him about wandering off, and the vial was in his pocket pressing warm and steady against his leg, and somewhere in the cool stone belly of Gringotts, ancient instruments were being laid out on cold tables and someone was beginning to count 112 thefts. The street smelled like exhaust and summer and fried food from the chippy 2 doors down. Harry walked through it quietly, and said nothing, and planned. The next morning, Petunia had her charity committee at 10. She always took Dudley, who could be relied upon to perform adorableness for the other women, and she always left Harry with a list of chores and a threat about what would happen if they weren't done. The chores took Harry an hour and 20 minutes. The threat had stopped working around the time he turned 4, though he'd never told her that. He was out the door and on the bus by 9:30. The bus driver, a large man named Gerald who smelled like coffee and cigarettes, gave Harry a long look when he climbed aboard with the correct change already counted out in his palm. School holiday, is it? Dentist appointment, Harry said, which was a lie he'd prepared specifically for bus drivers and adults who might feel obligated to do something about an unattended 5-year-old. Gerald shrugged with the philosophical resignation of a man who drove a bus through London and had seen stranger things, and Harry found a seat and watched the city scroll past the window and thought about contracts. He had gone over what Ragnok had told him 3 times in his head last night, lying on the camp mattress in the cupboard, listening to the house settle and Dudley snore through the thin wall. He'd thought about each piece separately and then together. The bindings. The stolen magic. The accounts. The network leading back to a Gringotts registered vault. He tried to think about who might have done it and kept coming up against the same wall, someone who was very skilled, someone who had access to him as an infant or before, someone powerful enough to place 112 separate bindings without detection, and someone who was receiving the benefit. He didn't know enough yet to name anyone. But he'd noticed that he didn't feel afraid of knowing. That struck him as interesting. When he thought about it, he'd expected fear, the same low-level constant fear that lived in the background of the Desley house, but what he felt instead was something more like the feeling he got when he found a book he wanted to read. Anticipation. A problem with pieces that could be found and fitted together. He thought he might tell Ragnok that, if Ragnok seemed like the sort to find it useful. Gringotts looked the same in the morning light, bronze doors and white marble and the cold mineral smell. Harry pushed through the door with both hands, it was very heavy, and walked to the counter. The goblin at the nearest station looked down at him. Harry looked up. "I have an appointment with Ragnok," Harry said. The goblin studied him for exactly the length of time it took to make a judgment. "Name?" "Harry Potter." Not a flicker of emotion on the goblin's face, but something shifted behind the eyes, recognition, maybe, or the professional equivalent of recognition, which was alertness. 1 moment. The moment was, in fact, 3 minutes, which Harry spent studying the inscriptions on the marble pillar nearest to him. He'd gotten through the full entrance poem and was working on a smaller carved text in a language he didn't recognize when Ragnok appeared from a corridor to the left of the main counter. He was wearing the same charcoal robes. In his hands he carried a leather-bound folder that looked like it had been used for a very long time. He stopped in front of Harry and gave him the assessment look again, and Harry got the impression this was simply how Ragnok looked at most things. "You came back," Ragnok said. "I said I would. Adults say things." He turned. "Come." The corridor he led Harry through was nothing like the grand entrance hall. It was narrow and stone and lit with lanterns that burned a pale blue, and it sloped downward at an angle that Harry's inner ear registered as steeper than it looked. Doors lined both walls, each one sealed with what looked like brass locks but which, when Harry got close enough, he could see were something more complex, not mechanical locks but arrangements of metal and engraving that moved slightly when he passed them. "Curse sealed," Ragnok said without looking back. "Diagnostic suites. Warded against magical interference from outside and magical leakage from inside. What happens in these rooms does not register on the ambient monitoring charms that run through the rest of the bank." He stopped at a door near the end of the corridor and pressed his palm to the lock. "Nothing you say or do in here will be observable by anyone outside this room. I want you to understand that before we begin." Harry nodded. The room inside was larger than the corridor suggested. The walls were covered in shelving and instrument cases and rolled parchment, and in the center stood a large flat table of the same dark green material as Bonebreaker's bull instrument, inlaid with brass tracery. Bonebreaker himself was already there, along with a younger goblin Harry hadn't seen before who was setting out instruments with the focused care of someone who'd been told to be careful and had taken it personally. "This is Copperlock," Bonebreaker said. "My apprentice. She is here to observe and to take notes, not to speak." He glanced at Copperlock. "She is aware of this." Copperlock said nothing. Her eyes, when they moved to Harry, were very bright. "Good morning," Harry said. Copperlock blinked. Then, solemnly, she inclined her head. "Before we begin the mapping," Ragnok said, setting the leather folder on a side table and opening it, "there are things you need to know about your circumstances." He turned to face Harry fully. "Sit on the table." Harry climbed up. The green material was smooth and faintly cool and hummed very slightly under his palms, the way a speaker hums when it's on but nothing's playing. "Your parents," Ragnok began, and Harry went still. "James and Lily Potter. They died when you were 15 months old." "I know," Harry said. "My aunt told me they died in a car crash." Ragnok's expression didn't change, but something about it became extremely precise, like a word being very carefully not said. "They did not die in a car crash. They were murdered by a dark wizard named Voldemort." The name landed in the room with a weight that suggested it was not usually said out loud. Harry turned it over in his mind. It sounded like something deliberately made to frighten people, which in his experience meant the person who'd chosen it had a particular idea of themselves. "Your mother's sacrifice," Ragnok continued, "produced a protection magic of considerable power. It destroyed Voldemort's physical body and marked you with the remnants of his curse, which is the scar on your forehead." He paused. "You are famous in the wizarding world. Known as the boy who lived. There is a prophecy attached to your name." "What does it say?" Harry asked. "We don't know the full text. It is held in the Department of Mysteries." Ragnok's tone suggested he found the Department of Mysteries about as trustworthy as a three-legged stool. "What we know is sufficient context to understand why someone with resources and motivation might want to control your power." He let that settle. "The bindings," Harry said. "Yes. And the vault, the one the magic is going to." Ragnok opened the folder. "Copperlock traced the channeling network last night. The vault receiving the transferred magic is registered under the name of the Order of the Phoenix. It is a private account, opened 40 years ago, listed under the directorship of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore." The name meant nothing to Harry yet. He registered it the way he'd register any unfamiliar piece of a puzzle, placed carefully, held for later. "Who is he?" Harry asked. "Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot." Ragnok paused. "The most powerful man in the British wizarding world, by most accounts." Another pause, shorter. "The man who placed you with your aunt and uncle." Harry looked at the table surface under his hands. The brass tracery was a pattern of interlocking loops, no beginning and no end. He traced one with his finger. "He put the bindings on me," Harry said. It wasn't a question. The bindings are consistent with magic that requires headmaster-level skill and access to restricted texts held at Hogwarts. The channeling network terminates at his registered vault. The bindings were placed, based on Bonebreaker's preliminary dating, at approximately 15 months of age, consistent with the period immediately following your parents' deaths, when you were in his custody before being delivered to your aunt. Ragnok looked at him steadily. "We cannot take this to the Wizengamot yet. Dumbledore chairs that body. We cannot take it to the Ministry. He has significant influence there. What we can do, is fix me first," Harry said. "A beat." "Yes," Ragnok said. "Fix you first." What followed was 3 hours that Harry would remember for the rest of his life, not because they were dramatic, they weren't, mostly, but because they were the first 3 hours in his memory where he felt like the most important thing in the room. Not important the way Dudley was important, demanding and center stage, but important the way a problem is important, worth solving, worth care, worth taking seriously. Bonebreaker mapped each binding with the patience and precision of a cartographer charting unknown territory. He described each one aloud as he found it, and Copperlock recorded everything in a hand that moved like water, and Ragnok translated the technical gobbledygook into plain language for Harry's benefit without being asked to, which was something Harry noticed and filed away as significant. They were not all the same, the bindings. That was what surprised Harry most. He'd imagined them as identical, uniform, a set of 112 identical gray-green threads. But they weren't. Some were simple, Bonebreaker said, basic suppression charms, the kind a skilled witch or wizard could place in minutes, looped around the edges of Harry's core like rubber bands. Some were complex, multi-layered constructions that had taken hours to place, knotted through the deep structure of his magic like roots through stone. Some were old, placed right after his parents' death. Some were newer, refreshed within the last year, which meant someone had had access to Harry recently enough to maintain them. At one point Bonebreaker said, "Remarkable," very quietly, and when Ragnok asked him to elaborate, he said, in the tone of a man who does not give compliments frivolously and knows it, "The boy's core is still functioning at this level of output despite 112 active drains. I have been a healer for 230 years. I have not seen this." Harry said, "Is that good?" "It means," Bonebreaker said, "that what they were afraid of was justified. Which should, perhaps, also be something you understand about your situation." Harry thought about that for a while as Bonebreaker continued mapping. Someone powerful had been afraid of him. Not of what he might do consciously, not of a weapon he might pick up, afraid of what he simply was, what he'd come into the world as, afraid enough to steal from him before he was old enough to know he had anything worth stealing. He turned that over like a stone and looked at what was underneath it. It was not comforting, exactly. But it was honest. And honest was, in Harry's limited but intensely practical experience, almost always more useful than comforting. By noon, Bonebreaker had a complete map. He and Ragnok conferred over it, the rolling parchment spread across the side table, both of them making marks and occasionally disagreeing in low, rapid gobbledygook. Copperlock sat with her notes and watched Harry with the bright careful eyes of someone cataloging something rare. "We can begin removal today," Ragnok said, coming back to the table. "One binding. The smallest, the most recently placed, the simplest to remove safely. We will monitor the effect on your core before proceeding further." He looked at Harry. "You may feel strange afterward. Some children describe it as warmth. Some describe it as pain. Some describe it as nothing at all. What does it feel like when they put one on?" Harry asked. A pause. "We don't know. It was done when you were an infant." Harry nodded. "Okay. Do it." Bonebreaker positioned himself to Harry's left and placed his hands, not touching Harry, but close, palms facing inward, and did something that Harry felt before he understood it. A pulling sensation, deep and interior, like a splinter being drawn out of a place he hadn't known had a splinter in it. Not painful. Strange. The sensation of a knot releasing that he hadn't known was tight. And then something rushed through him like warm water through cold pipes. Harry made a sound he hadn't planned on making, just a soft exhale, surprise more than anything, and held very still and felt the warmth move through him from core to extremity, from the center of his chest all the way to his fingers and the soles of his feet, and the room looked slightly different after it, the lantern slightly brighter, the colors of the brass instruments slightly sharper, as if someone had cleaned a window he'd always been looking through. "Well," Ragnok said, watching the large instrument to Harry's right, which was currently filling with blue light so rich and dense it was almost violet. "One down." Harry looked at his hands. They looked the same. They felt different. 111 to go, Harry said. Ragnok made a sound that was, Harry would later decide, the closest thing to a laugh he'd heard from a goblin. Not warm. Not soft. But real. "Yes," he said. 111 to go. They established the routine over the following weeks with the methodical care that the goblins applied to everything. Harry would come twice a week, Tuesday and Friday, when Petunia's schedule was predictable, taking the bus from Little Whinging to London with his counted change and his cover stories. One binding removed per visit, sometimes two if the binding was simple and Bonebreaker was satisfied with Harry's recovery. Ragnok taught him to read goblin contracts on the off weeks, sitting at the side table with parchment and a pot of ink while Copperlock occasionally looked up from her own work to silently correct his spelling. He had accounts, Griphook showed him. Griphook was exactly as Ragnok had described, competent, businesslike, and occasionally, in the corner of his expression, something that might have been interest. He was young for a goblin, which Harry gathered meant he was somewhere in the range of 70 years old, and he had the energy of someone trying to prove something. Potter Trust Vault, Griphook said, laying out the ledger on the table in his small, neat office. Established by your parents. Currently contains 412,000 galleons in liquid assets, plus jewelry, documents, and personal effects. He turned a page. Potter Family Vault, accessible at majority. Contains approximately 12 million galleons, property deeds, investment instruments, and heirlooms dating to the 13th century. He turned another page. Black Trust Vault, established through your godfather's will. I have a godfather? Harry asked. Griphook paused with the professional caution of someone who just realized he was navigating a social complication. Sirius Black. He is currently incarcerated in Azkaban prison. For what? Murder. A beat. Allegedly. He was imprisoned without trial, which is technically illegal under wizarding law, but the circumstances of the time, he stopped himself. This is outside my expertise. I would recommend you raise the matter with Ragnok. Harry put it in the list. The list was getting long. He was going to need to start writing it down. There are also 2 properties, Griphook continued, settling back into the comfort of things he could quantify. Potter Manor in Godric's Hollow, currently in Fidelius protection, technically inaccessible until the Secret Keeper releases it, which will require legal action. And a secondary property in the Scottish Highlands, currently unoccupied and maintained by a property management contract Gringotts holds. He looked up. The property management fees have been paid from your vault without your authorization. This is legal under the terms of the original property maintenance agreement. However, who authorized the original agreement? Harry asked. Griphook's eyes were very sharp. Albus Dumbledore, acting under a temporary guardian designation assigned to him by the Ministry 3 days after your parents' deaths. He closed the ledger. The designation was temporary. It was never formally revoked, which means it has been in use well past its legal expiry date. Harry was quiet for a moment. He's been managing my money, Harry said. And my properties. And keeping my godfather in prison without a trial. And stealing my magic. He looked at Griphook. How much of my money has gone through that Order of the Phoenix Vault? Griphook's expression was, for the first time, not professionally neutral. That, he said carefully, is a question we are building a very detailed answer to. He held Harry's gaze. It will be ready when it will be most useful. Harry nodded. He thought about Ragnok's hands holding the law like a weapon. Good, he said. On the bus home that afternoon, Harry watched London roll past the window and held the glass veil in his palm, hidden inside his fist. The light inside it still burned blue and fierce. He pressed his thumb against the gold-sealed top and felt the warmth of it through the glass. 112 thefts. 1 godfather wrongly imprisoned. Money moved without consent. A guardian designation used years past its legal life. All of it very careful. All of it almost invisible. Almost. He put the vial back in his pocket and looked out at the city and thought about what it meant to plan slowly, carefully, and well. He thought about the patience of people who build things properly, the way the goblins moved, unhurried and certain, the way Bonebreaker dated each binding down to the week of its placement, the way Ragnok said when it will be most useful and not as soon as possible. He thought he understood, now, why powerful people so often underestimated the patient ones. The bus driver announced his stop. Harry got off, walked the 12 minutes back to Privet Drive, and was deep in his cupboard reading the Goblin contract Ragnok had given him for homework when Petunia arrived home at 3:30 and started making dinner, and never knew he'd been anywhere at all. Chapter 2, The Unbinding. The second binding came out on a Friday in October, 2 weeks after the first, and it felt like someone had opened a window in a room Harry hadn't realized was stuffy. The third came out the following Tuesday and cracked a stone in the diagnostic room's floor, not dramatically, not with any sound, just a hairline fracture that appeared in the green table's surface while Bonebreaker worked, and which the old healer regarded with the expression of a man who had seen stranger things but was making a note of this one. "Is that bad?" Harry asked. "It means your core responded faster than projected." Bonebreaker ran a finger along the fracture without concern. "It will need to be replaced. Dark green diorite is expensive." He looked at Harry. "You will not apologize." "I wasn't going to." "Good." Bonebreaker removed his hands from their working position and flexed them slowly. "Apologizing for the effects of having your magic restored would be somewhat like apologizing for bleeding after someone removes a knife." Harry filed that away. It was the most words Bonebreaker had said to him in one go that weren't technical, and he suspected it was intentional. By November, they were 6 bindings down. By January, 12. By the following summer, Harry's 6th birthday passing unmarked at Privet Drive, Petunia leaving a small dry cake on the kitchen counter that Dudley ate half of before Harry got to it, they were at 23 removed, and Harry had begun to notice things. Not dramatic things. Subtle ones. The way the lights in whatever room he was in seemed slightly brighter than physics explained. The way the glass vial in his pocket had become uncomfortably warm near the end of some days. The way, once, when Dudley had cornered him in the back garden and shoved him hard enough that Harry went down on one knee, the grass around Harry's hand had grown 3 inches in the 2 seconds his palm was pressed to the earth, which had startled Dudley badly enough that he'd gone inside and not bothered Harry for a week. Harry hadn't done it deliberately. But he hadn't not done it either, which he thought was interesting. He mentioned it to Ragnok. Ragnok said, "What were you feeling when it happened?" Harry considered the question honestly. "Nothing much. A little annoyed." Ragnok looked at him the way he sometimes did, the look that wasn't assessment anymore, the one that had evolved over 8 months of twice-weekly visits into something Harry didn't have a word for, though it felt like what he imagined being taken seriously by a parent might feel like, based purely on hypotheticals because he had no actual reference. Accidental magic at your level of suppression suggests that even with 79 bindings still in place, your core is beginning to reassert itself through the gaps we've created. He sat back in his chair. "We should accelerate." "I thought we couldn't." "I thought so too. But your recovery rate between sessions is faster than any precedent we have." He tapped the parchment in front of him, the map of Harry's bindings, now annotated with removal dates and recovery notes in Copperlock's precise script. "Bonebreaker believes we can safely manage 2 removals per session instead of 1, provided your core response stays within acceptable parameters." "What are acceptable parameters?" "Nothing explodes," Ragnok said, with the flatness that Harry had learned to recognize as his version of a joke. The acceleration changed things. 2 per session, sometimes 3 in the longer ones, and the effects between visits began stacking. Harry started noticing the full scope of what the bindings had been doing, not just suppressing output, but suppressing perception. His senses had apparently been running at a fraction of capacity, because by the time he was 6.5 and they'd cleared 40 bindings, the world had acquired a texture he hadn't known it was missing. Magic had a feeling to it. Not the burst of it when Bonebreaker removed a binding, but a constant low-level hum that emanated from living things, from objects with history, from places where strong emotions had happened. He'd always assumed everyone felt this. He mentioned it to Ragnok, who said no, most people felt a mild ambient awareness of strong magic. They did not, generally, walk down Privet Drive and feel the wards Dumbledore had placed on number 4 like a physical pressure against the back of their neck. "Don't react to it," Ragnok said. "When you're there. Don't let him know the wards are readable to you. He checks them periodically. The readings will tell him what he expects to see, a suppressed core, steady drain rates, because we have not changed the outward signature of your bindings. The channels are still open." He paused. "We are, however, no longer allowing them to transmit." Harry looked at him. "You redirected them?" Bonebreaker found that the channeling mechanism in each binding is a distinct structure from the suppression mechanism. We can dismantle the suppression while leaving the channel intact but inactive. From the outside, the drain appears to continue. The vault continues to receive what looks like your magic. He held Harry's gaze. It is not your magic. What is it? The corner of Ragnok's mouth moved. Goblin forged magical equivalent. Indistinguishable from baseline Potter signature to external scanners. A pause. We have been submitting false readings to Dumbledore's vault for 4 months. He believes your magical development is proceeding exactly as he intended. Harry was quiet for a moment, processing this. The ward feeling against the back of his neck. The false readings. The careful, patient construction of a world that looked normal from the outside while something completely different was happening underneath. You're very good at this, Harry said. We are goblins, Ragnok said. Humans have been underestimating us for 900 years. We have had time to develop compensatory skills. He turned back to his parchment. Bring your contract reading for today. The Gringotts section. Harry pulled out the rolled parchment he'd been studying on the bus. Goblin contract law, wizard inheritance law, the various sections of the magical beings protection charter. He'd been reading it the way he read everything, not to memorize it but to understand the architecture of it, the way each piece connected to the others, where the load-bearing walls were. The charter, Harry said, spreading the parchment on the table. Section 14. Magical beings defined as sapient and self-determining are entitled to legal representation in all proceedings affecting their magical endowment. He looked up. Does that include binding removal? If someone tried to stop us, they would need to demonstrate that the bindings were legally placed, Ragnok said. Which would require admitting they existed. He looked at Harry with something approaching satisfaction. You see why we have not rushed. Evidence first, Harry said. All of it. So when it comes out, there's no room to maneuver. Documentation, Ragnok said, is the only weapon that cannot be deflected. They worked through the Gringotts section with Ragnok asking questions and Harry answering them, and occasionally the questions were not about the text but about what Harry thought, which was the part of these sessions he liked best. Ragnok had never once told him that an opinion was too large for his age or that he'd understand when he was older, which were the two phrases Harry had heard most from adults and which he'd stopped respecting within the first months of being able to talk. It was during one of these sessions, late in the spring of Harry's 7th year, that Ragnok said without preamble, "We need to discuss your education." Harry looked up from a clause about vault access rights. I go to school. You go to a Muggle school, which teaches you to read and write and perform arithmetic at a level you exceeded approximately 2 years ago. Ragnok folded his hands on the table. You need to learn magic. Not formal casting, you are not ready for a wand yet and won't be until more bindings are removed. But theory. History. The structure of magic and how it behaves and why. He paused. We also need to teach you gobbledygook. Harry blinked. The goblin language. You spend 2 days a week in a goblin bank having conversations about your magical core and your legal rights. Learning gobbledygook is, Ragnok said, as if explaining something obvious to someone who had briefly forgotten what obvious meant, both practical and courteous. Harry felt something warm cross his chest. He wasn't sure Ragnok had meant it as a compliment and suspected he hadn't, but it landed as one anyway. Okay, he said. When do we start? Now, Ragnok said, and reached for the second stack of parchment. Magic theory, as Ragnok taught it, was nothing like Harry had expected. He'd expected rules, this causes this, that causes that, memorize the formula and apply it. What he got instead was something closer to physics and philosophy in argument with each other, which suited him considerably better. Magic was intention plus energy plus knowledge of the natural world, Ragnok said, and none of those 3 things worked without the other 2. A person could intend anything they liked without the energy to express it. They could have enormous energy and no intention and get nothing but noise. They could have intention and energy with no understanding of what they were affecting and get, at best, chaos and, at worst, a hole in the fabric of reality, which was not metaphorical. Every spell wizards cast, Ragnok said, is a simplified interface. A shortcut. The incantation and the wand movement and the specific configuration of magical energy that a spell requires, these are training wheels. They work because generations of witches and wizards have built up a collective magical memory that the shortcut draws on. He held up a finger. But the shortcut is not the magic. The magic is underneath it. Someone who understands the magic underneath does not need the shortcut. Harry thought about the grass in the garden, growing 3 inches in 2 seconds. What if you don't know you're doing it? He asked. That, Ragnok said, is raw magic. Unstructured. Powerful but imprecise. A hammer when you need a scalpel. He looked at Harry. As more bindings come off, your raw output will increase significantly. You will need to begin consciously directing it, or you will have incidents. Like the grass. Like the grass, but larger, and potentially in front of people who are paying attention. He paused. I will teach you to direct it. Not through wand work, you don't have a wand and won't need one in the traditional sense. Through intent and breath and structure. He picked up a small brass ball from the table and set it between them. Move this. Harry looked at the ball. He thought about the grass. He thought about intention, not wanting the ball to move but meaning it to move, meaning it the way he meant to take a step when he walked. He breathed out. The ball moved 6 inches across the table and fell off the edge. Ragnok caught it without looking. Again, he said, setting it back. They spent an hour on it. By the end, Harry could move it to a specific point consistently, and once, just once, accidentally, he moved all 4 brass balls on the table simultaneously, which sent Copperlock's ink pot off the edge of her desk and which she caught with a speed that suggested she'd been half expecting something like this to happen. Apologize to Copperlock, Ragnok said. Sorry, Copperlock, Harry said. Copperlock set her ink pot back on her desk and gave Harry a very direct look and said, in English, which was the first time Harry had heard her speak it, don't be sorry. Do it on purpose next time. Ragnok said something sharp in gobbledygook. Copperlock went back to her notes. Harry caught Ragnok's eye and kept his face very still, because grinning felt like the wrong move, and Ragnok gave him a look that said he knew exactly what Harry was not doing and approved of the discipline. Gobbledygook was hard. It was built on a logic that English didn't share, inflection carried most of the meaning, and the same root word could indicate a statement, a question, a command, or a warning depending on pitch and rhythm. But Harry had a good ear and a better memory, and by the 2nd month he could follow simple conversations, and by the 4th he could hold one, haltingly, about basic topics. By the end of the summer between his 7th and 8th years, he could follow Ragnok and Bonebreaker's technical discussions at about 60% comprehension, and he pretended it was 40% so they'd be slightly less careful in front of him, which was a habit he developed early and maintained for its utility. He was 7.5. 63 bindings were gone. The effects were not subtle anymore. The house on Privet Drive had a complicated relationship with Harry now, which was mostly that it seemed to like him more than its actual occupants did. Plants he'd ignored grew toward him when he passed. Light switches turned on before he touched them. Once, memorably, the boiler had fixed itself the morning after Vernon had spent an hour screaming at it and £300 to a plumber who'd declared it unfixable. Harry had been in the kitchen when he heard it coughing and sputtering and had looked at it and thought just work with the particular weary exasperation of a person who was tired of things being broken, and it had made a sound like a resigned sigh and started functioning. Vernon had been baffled. Petunia had looked at Harry over Vernon's shoulder with an expression that mixed fear with something involuntary, something Harry read, correctly, as the recognition she could never quite suppress that he was Lily's child, and Lily had always made things work when she wanted them to. Harry had made them all dinner that night because it was Wednesday and it was his turn, and said nothing, and gone back to his gobbledygook practice. He was becoming very good at existing in plain sight. On a Tuesday in October, when Harry was 8 years old, Bonebreaker removed the 70th binding. The number mattered because Ragnok had told him it would. The first 70 were the outer layers, the suppression web, the ones that clamped his core from the outside. From 70 onward, they'd be going deeper, into the bindings that were knotted through his core's fundamental structure, the ones placed with the most skill and the most intention, the ones that were, Bonebreaker had said this plainly, which Harry appreciated, the most dangerous to remove. The 70th came out on an ordinary Tuesday morning in a session that had started quietly, with Harry working through a section on blood inheritance rights while Bonebreaker prepared his instruments and Copperlock reorganized the removal notes, and then Bonebreaker said, "Ready," and Harry set down his parchment and sat on the table and Bonebreaker began. It was different from the others. The previous removals had felt like relief, the release of pressure, the warmth of returned energy, the slightly brighter colors. This felt like someone had reached into his chest and taken hold of something very old and very deep and pulled, and the pulling went on and on with a sensation that Harry could only describe as fire traveling backwards through a wire, not exactly pain but in the same country as pain, a vast intensity that started somewhere near his sternum and radiated outward through his arms to the tips of his fingers and his toes, and his hands were suddenly glowing. Actually glowing. Blue-white light, the same color as the vial, pouring off his skin like heat off tarmac in August, and the instruments on the shelves were all singing, different pitches creating a dissonant chord, and the new diorite table had 3 new cracks forming in real time. Ragnok had the larger containment instrument out before Harry finished the intake breath and had it pointed at Harry's hands, which dampened the light to something manageable. Bonebreaker's face was completely still, completely focused, both hands steady as he completed the removal. The light cut off. The instruments fell silent. The table stopped cracking. Harry sat in the quiet for a moment and breathed. Everything looked very clear. Not just brighter, the depth of it had changed, the world wearing an extra dimension that he hadn't realized was missing. He could feel the wards on the bank with perfect clarity, individual layers of them, their purpose and age and the intent behind each one. He could feel the residual magical signatures of everyone who'd been in this room, fainter impressions of them like footprints. He could feel Ragnok's core, compact, dense, very old, with a quality of endurance to it, and Bonebreaker's, deeper still, quieter, more patient, and Copperlock's, young and sharp and fizzing with curiosity. He could feel his own. A vast rolling presence under his ribs, barely moving because barely needed to, like an ocean being still. He touched the edge of it with his attention and felt it respond like it had been waiting, like it had always been waiting, like it had been doing nothing but waiting for 8 years for someone to notice it was there. "Harry," Ragnok said. "I'm fine," Harry said, and it was true, and his voice came out completely steady. Ragnok studied him for a long moment. Bonebreaker was making notes. Copperlock was looking at her instrument readings with an expression that someone who knew her less well might have called awe. 42 to go, Harry said. 42 to go, Ragnok agreed. He set down the containment instrument. Also, you should know that the ambient magic output you just produced briefly registered on the monitoring systems 1 floor up. He paused. We have already filed it as a calibration error. Harry almost smiled. Thank you. Don't thank me. Buy better containment instruments. Ragnok looked at the cracked table. And stop breaking my furniture. The following 2 years had a different quality. Not faster, necessarily, Bonebreaker maintained a careful measured pace because the deep bindings demanded it, but fuller. Richer. Harry was growing in every direction at once, and not just magically. He was reading everything Ragnok gave him, and then asking for more. Wizarding history, goblin history, magical theory texts that were 3 centuries old and written in a style that assumed prior knowledge Harry didn't technically have but picked up by inference. He was doing wandless exercises every session, moving things, restructuring them, once, by accident, during a particularly absorbing argument with Ragnok about whether the statute of secrecy was legally defensible, making all the furniture in the room rotate 90 degrees simultaneously, which Ragnok had responded to by pausing, looking at the repositioned furniture, and then going back to his point without acknowledging it. Harry adored him, in the way you adore someone who never tells you you're amazing but whose expectations for you make it clear they believe you can do anything. He was 9.5 when he asked, during a session break while Bonebreaker was preparing the deep structure instruments. How much do you know about what he's planning? Ragnok looked up from his parchment. Dumbledore? He put me with the Dursleys specifically, Harry said. He'd thought about this for a long time. Not just to hide me, there were better hiding options that Gringotts records show he considered and rejected. He chose them. Blood wards on the house tied to my mother's sister. Cheap to maintain, hard to break, built around sacrifice magic. He kept his voice even. He needs me to come to Hogwarts dependent and grateful. He needs me to arrive with no power, no resources, no awareness of what was taken, so I'll accept whatever role he's designed. Ragnok was quiet for a moment. Go on. The prophecy is about Voldemort, Harry said. And it's about me. Dumbledore thinks he knows what needs to happen. He spent a decade setting the board for it. He has me living in a house that keeps me small and compliant, magic stolen, so I'll arrive at Hogwarts as an average student who needs guidance, no access to my vaults, no knowledge of my family, a dead godfather rotting in Azkaban, so there's no one who might tell me things he doesn't want me to know. He looked at Ragnok. He wants to use me, Harry said. Not cruelly, maybe. He probably thinks it's necessary. He probably loses sleep over it. He paused. But he's been stealing from me since I was 15 months old to fund an organization that exists to fight his war, and he put me in a cupboard to make sure I'd cooperate when he needed me. And? Ragnok said. And I'm not going to cooperate, Harry said. Not with his plan. But I'm also not going to run from Voldemort or pretend he isn't a problem. He killed my parents. The prophecy is real. He sat back. I'll deal with Voldemort. On my terms. When I'm ready. And I'll deal with Dumbledore through the law, through your documentation, through the Wisengamot when we've rebuilt enough of it that he doesn't control the verdict. He met Ragnok's eyes. That's what all this is for. Right? Ragnok held his gaze for a long moment. I have been a curse breaker for 140 years, he said. I have worked with human wizards on every variety of legal, illegal, and theoretically impossible but apparently not problem. He paused. You are 9 years old. Almost 10. You are almost 10 years old, Ragnok said, with the deliberate precision of a man noting the distinction because it matters, and you have described the strategy we have been building for 4 years more clearly and concisely than most adult wizards could have in twice the time. He turned back to his parchment. Yes. That is what all this is for. Harry nodded. He picked up his gobbledygook practice notes and returned to the lesson. The Dursleys were, increasingly, a background texture rather than a problem. This was partly because Harry spent as little time in the house as was logistically feasible, partly because the house seemed to have extended the preference it showed toward Harry to covering for him in various minor ways that were convenient, and partly because Harry had quietly made himself both invisible and indispensable at the same time, which was a combination that rendered most adults passive. He cooked. He cleaned. He fixed things. He did it not with the miserable servility of a child trying to earn love but with the calm efficiency of someone who lived in a space and intended it to be functional. Petunia, who had expected to spend 10 years managing a resentful charity case, was instead presented with a child who gave her no trouble, fixed her boiler, kept the garden alive in drought conditions, and asked nothing, and she had developed a relationship with this reality that was mostly avoidance and occasionally, in moments she clearly found uncomfortable, something approaching guilt. Vernon never developed that. Vernon's relationship with Harry was a constant low-level hostility that he expressed mostly through noise and absence. Harry navigated it with the ease of long practice. When Vernon was loud, Harry was quiet. When Vernon was in a room, Harry was in a different one. When Vernon blocked a doorway in the particular way he had, broad-shouldered and red-faced, Harry waited with a stillness that seemed to unsettle him more than defiance would have. Dudley was different from his parents in a way that Harry had started to notice with genuine curiosity around age 8. Dudley was not bright, but he was perceptive in the way that physical creatures are perceptive. He could read a room, feel when something was different, register threats with the animal accuracy of a creature whose entire school career had been built on assessing power dynamics. He had registered, sometime in the past year, that the dynamic between himself and Harry had shifted. He hadn't said anything about it. He'd just stopped. Stopped shoving. Stopped the games where his friends chased Harry around the neighborhood. Stopped eating Harry's food. He watched Harry sometimes with an expression that mixed confusion with something close to wariness, and Harry let him be confused, because explaining it would have required explaining things Harry had no intention of explaining. On the night of Harry's 10th birthday, July 31st, another unmarked date, Petunia leaving a card on the counter this year because the guilt had apparently reached a threshold, Dudley watching Harry read it with that wary expression. Harry lay in his room. He had a room now, a small one, relocated from the cupboard when he was 7.5 because Petunia had come close enough to guilt to overcorrect, and took the glass vial from his bedside table and held it above him in the dark. The light inside it had changed. It was the same deep blue but denser now, richer, with an energy to it that pressed against the glass like something that had outgrown its container. 31 bindings remained. He would be 11 in a year. His Hogwarts letter would come. And when he walked through those doors, he would not be the boy Dumbledore had designed. He closed his hand around the vial and felt his own magic respond to it, a deep resonant warmth, like a note struck in a large room, the echo of it filling everything. He was not afraid of Hogwarts. He was not afraid of Voldemort, or Dumbledore, or the war that had killed his parents and bent his entire childhood out of shape. Fear was a response to things you weren't prepared for, and Harry had been preparing, with obsessive, goblin-tutored, contract-reading thoroughness, for 4.5 years. He was not afraid of any of it. He put the vial down, turned over, and went to sleep. He had exactly 1 year and 11 sessions left. By Christmas, 20 bindings remained. By spring, 14. By midsummer, 8. Each one now a major undertaking, Bonebreaker working with both hands and Copperlock managing the containment instruments and Ragnok standing at the monitoring station with the expression of someone watching something go either exactly right or catastrophically wrong and not yet knowing which. The 7th deepest binding, removed on a cold April morning, Harry turning 10 and then 10.5 while the London wind hit the bronze doors, caused every window in the diagnostic corridor to blow out simultaneously, and it did it silently, the glass simply ceasing to exist, and Ragnok had to have a conversation with the bank manager about renovation that he referred to later as, not my most enjoyable morning. Should we slow down? Harry asked. No, said Bonebreaker and Ragnok at exactly the same time. Harry filed this under good signs. His wand, he didn't have one, but Ragnok had initiated contact with an independent wand-maker in Switzerland, a woman named Erica who specialized in non-standard cores, who had been sent a reading of Harry's magical signature without his name attached, and who had written back with 3 pages of dense notes and the words "I have never seen this in 40 years of wand-making" underlined twice. His wand was going to be something else, apparently. Something that the standard English wand-makers wouldn't have the materials for. Holly and Phoenix Feather, Ragnok said, reading from the standard Ollivander catalog with the expression of someone reading a menu that only offers one item. That is what the traditional wandmaker will assign you. Is it wrong for me? It is deeply, profoundly wrong for you, Ragnok said. Phoenix Feather is the correct core for someone requiring flexibility and power. Holly is conventional. They are not terrible choices. He set down the catalog. They are also the choices of someone who has designed a narrative and needs the props to fit. Dumbledore shops at Ollivander's. Dumbledore has a relationship with Ollivander that is, let us say, collegial. He held Harry's gaze. Erica in Zurich has no such relationships. She works in elder wood and dragon heartstring and materials that the English establishment considers eccentric. He paused. She would like to meet you, when you are in a position to travel. After the letter, Harry said. After the letter, Ragnok agreed. The Hogwarts letter arrived on the morning of July 31st, Harry's 11th birthday, brought not by Owl. The Owl came to the house, yes, and found no one home because Harry was in London, but by a second owl that arrived at Gringotts at 10:30 and which Griphook caught with the smoothness of someone who had been expecting it and positioned himself accordingly. He brought it down to the diagnostic suite without being asked. Harry opened it there, at the table where 81 bindings had been removed over 6 years. Ragnok stood to his left. Bonebreaker was organizing instruments for today's session, the fourth to last, if everything went as planned. Copperlock sat at her desk and very deliberately did not look up, which was how she conveyed that she was in fact paying close attention. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Harry read it through completely. He turned it over and read the supply list. He noted the specific items: a standard wand, which he would not be getting from Ollivanders, and a standard set of books, which he already owned half of and had read all of. He set it down on the table. 6 years, he said. 6 years, Ragnok confirmed. How many sessions left? 4. Possibly 3. Bonebreaker didn't look up from his instruments. The final binding is the earliest placed. The deepest. The largest. He set down the tool in his hands and turned. It will be the most significant. Harry nodded. He picked up the letter again, looked at it, and folded it precisely along its original crease. "Then let's not waste time," he said. The final binding came out on a Tuesday in the last week of August, 8 days before the Hogwarts Express was due to leave platform 9 3/4, 7 days after Harry had taken a train to Zurich with a Gringotts escort and come back with a wand that Erica had handed him with both hands and the expression of someone completing a commission they were very proud of. He put it in his pocket now. "Elderwood and Thunderbird Tail Feather," she'd said, and told him what it meant: instinct over tradition, the lightning before the thunder, the magic that acts before the mind catches up with it. He'd held it in the wand shop and felt it respond to him like a greeting, like recognition, like "there you are." He put it in his pocket, and he sat on the table in the diagnostic suite, and Bonebreaker placed his hands, and took a slow breath. "This one," Bonebreaker said, without preamble, "is not like the others. It was placed with intent that goes beyond suppression." His hands were steady. His voice was completely even. "It is the anchor binding. The others drew from you. This one defines the parameters of you. It is the binding that told your core what it was allowed to be." A pause. "When it comes off, you will feel everything that was being kept from you. All of it. At once." Harry looked at Ragnok, who was at the monitoring station, both hands on the instruments, eyes on Harry. "Ready?" Bonebreaker said. "Yes," Harry said. It was not like the others. It was not like the 70th, which had felt like fire through a wire. It was not like any of the deep ones, which had been intense and manageable and temporary. This was like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air pressure drops and the world goes very still and you can smell lightning before it arrives, and then it arrives, and it is not violent, it is just total, a reality reset so complete that the world before it seems like a rough draft. Harry felt the binding release and then he felt his core uncoil, that vast rolling ocean under his ribs, and it filled him from basement to rooftop, from fingertips to the crown of his head, and the room blazed blue-white for a full 3 seconds during which no one moved because there was nothing to do but let it happen. When the light died, the diagnostic suite looked different. Every instrument on every shelf was lit. The cracks in the table had sealed. The lanterns on the walls had changed from pale blue to a rich gold that hadn't been there before. And Harry sat on the table with his hands in his lap and his eyes open and felt, for the first time in his life, completely and entirely like himself. Ragnok set down his instruments very carefully. Copperlock, who had been maintaining containment protocols with both hands, let out a slow breath. Bonebreaker stood back and looked at Harry with the expression of a craftsman looking at finished work, critical, thorough, and ultimately satisfied. "Done," Bonebreaker said. "Done," Harry said. The word sat in the room with a weight that deserved the silence they gave it. Then Ragnok said, "Now," and something in his voice had shifted from the professional steadiness of 6 years to something warmer, still controlled but warmer, "we discuss what happens in 8 days. Harry looked at him. The lanterns behind Ragnok were gold. The vial in Harry's pocket was burning with a warmth that went through the fabric, and he could feel it from his thigh to his chest. "Tell me about the school," Harry said. Ragnok almost smiled. "Actually almost, this time." "Tell you? You've read everything about it that we have in the library. Tell me what you know that isn't in the library." A pause. And then Ragnok sat down, which he never did during work sessions, too much to do, too much to monitor, and folded his hands on the table, and told him. Harry listened, and learned, and planned, and felt every word land in a core that was finally, completely, fully his. Chapter 3, The Boy Who Arrived. The Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry was on the platform at 9:30. Not because he was anxious, he'd spent 6 years being taught by creatures who treated anxiety as an inefficiency, but because platforms 9 and 10 at King's Cross had a wall between them that wizarding families ran it with trolleys, and Harry had wanted to see it done a few times before doing it himself. He stood near the bookshop with a cup of tea he'd bought from the cafe, wearing clothes that actually fit him for the first time in his life, and watched. The tea was good. The wall running was interesting. He'd been shopping the previous week. Diagon Alley, navigated with grip hook at his shoulder and a vault key in his pocket, had been a revelation, not the wonder of it, exactly, because Harry had known about magic for years, but the specific wonder of spending money on things he actually needed without asking permission from anyone. Books, robes, equipment. He'd gone to Madame Malkin's and been measured for robes that fit, which was a novelty sharp enough to be almost emotional. He'd browsed Flourish and Blots for an hour while Griphook sat in a chair near the door and read a newspaper with the air of a man performing a professional duty he did not dislike. He had not gone to Ollivander's. His wand was in his inside pocket, a smooth warmth against his ribs. He'd also, on a quiet Wednesday, sent a letter to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement containing a formal complaint signed by Ragnok, 12 supporting documents, and a legal brief Ragnok had spent 2 months building, regarding the illegal imprisonment of Sirius Black. The letter had not gone through the standard owl post. It had been delivered by Gringotts courier, which gave it a legal standing the ministry couldn't simply ignore, and which meant there was now a record of its receipt that no one could claim they hadn't seen. Harry didn't expect immediate results. He didn't need immediate results. He just needed the record. He watched a family of red-haired people, enormous family, 6 children visible, 2 parents, pile through the wall in a cheerful chaos of trunks and owls and someone shouting about a forgotten telescope. He noted the family. Weasleys, Ragnok had mentioned. Old wizarding family, blood traders by the establishment's assessment, which meant they valued people over politics, which was a useful data point. At 10 to 11, Harry picked up his trunk, tucked his owl's cage under his arm. Hedwig, a snowy owl who'd come to him in the magical menagerie and refused to leave him alone until he bought her, and whose personality was a more opinionated version of Copperlocks, and walked through the wall. The Hogwarts Express was scarlet and enormous and smelled like coal smoke and magic, and Harry walked alongside it to find an empty compartment near the front, stowed his trunk, settled Hedwig on the seat beside him, and opened his Transfiguration text to the chapter he'd marked. He had read it already. He reread it now because the theory of matter rearrangement was interesting no matter how many times you examined it, and because someone had worked an error into the 3rd paragraph that he wanted to verify was actually an error and not a regional variation in terminology. It was an error. He made a note in the margin. The corridor outside filled with noise as more students arrived. Harry read. Hedwig observed the passing parade of humans with the look she had when she was deciding whether to be interested or contemptuous. At 11:05, the door opened and 2 boys stood in the frame. One of them was round-faced and anxious, holding a toad that seemed to be trying to escape. The other was, Harry recognized the red hair before anything else, one of the Weasley children, younger than the ones he'd seen at the barrier, with a smudge on his nose and the look of someone who'd been slightly overwhelmed by the morning. "Can we sit here?" the round-faced one asked. "Everywhere else is full." Harry moved Hedwig's cage half an inch. "Sure." They settled in. The toad was placed firmly in a box. The red-haired boy, who introduced himself as Ron Weasley, which matched Harry's mental catalogue, was working through a pasty with the focused energy of someone who'd had a large and chaotic family breakfast but had still somehow not eaten enough. The round-faced one was Neville Longbottom, who Harry added to a different list in his head: Longbottom, another old family, another orbit in the story of Voldemort's defeat, another child who'd been dealt a complicated hand before he was old enough to hold it. "Are you Harry?" Ron started. "Yes," Harry said. "Are you actually related to all those people you were with at the barrier?" Ron blinked. "Oh. Yeah. 5 brothers. And a sister." He paused. "You don't seem, everyone says." "What does everyone say?" Ron's ears went red. It was a very complete redness, all the way up. "That you're, famous. The boy who lived and all that." Harry considered the phrase. He'd known it was coming. Ragnok had warned him, Griphook had warned him, various books had confirmed it. He'd prepared a response that was truthful without being either falsely modest or insufferably confident. "Someone tried to kill me when I was a baby," Harry said. "It didn't work. I don't remember any of it." He returned to his book. "I'm not sure that's the same as being famous for something I did." Ron thought about this with the visible concentration of someone working through a philosophical position he hadn't expected to encounter before lunch. Neville looked at Harry with a steadiness that was interesting, not the gaping awe that Harry had braced for, but something more like recognition. "My parents were hurt by Voldemort too," Neville said quietly. Harry looked up. Not everyone said the name. Ron had flinched at Harry's use of it earlier and recovered well enough, but there it was. "I know," Harry said, and meant it without elaboration, which Neville seemed to understand because his shoulders settled slightly. "How do you?" "I read a lot," Harry said simply. A girl appeared in the compartment door, bushy hair, alert eyes, the look of someone running on excitement and the engine of her own competence. "Have any of you seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville," she clocked Neville and the box. "Oh. Good. You should keep better hold of him." She looked around the compartment with the systematic efficiency of someone triaging a room for useful information. Her eyes landed on Harry's book. "You've annotated that." "There's an error in the 3rd paragraph," Harry said. She sat down without being invited. Harry respected this. "Where?" she demanded, holding out her hand for the book. He showed her. She read the paragraph twice, and her expression did something interesting, the professional certainty of someone who had memorized the text encountering the discomfort of realizing the text might be wrong. She read it a 3rd time. "You're right," she said, with the particular grace of someone who was capable of being wrong and knew how to handle it without drama. She handed the book back. "I'm Hermione Granger." "Harry Potter." She blinked. The standard reaction assembled itself across her face and then dismantled itself as something else took over, the specific recalibration of a highly intelligent person encountering a data point that doesn't match expectations. Harry had been expecting one reaction. She appeared to be running a different assessment entirely. "You've already read that book," she said. "Most of them." "Which ones haven't you read?" "History of Magic's a bit thin. And the charms text is competent but limited on theory." "A beat." And then Hermione Granger smiled, with the full force of someone who'd found a compatible brain in a compartment she'd walked into looking for a lost toad. "I have thoughts about the charms text." "I'd like to hear them," Harry said. Ron looked between them. "This is going to be a long train ride," he said, to nobody in particular, and reached for another pasty. The Great Hall was designed to impress, and it did. Harry walked in with the rest of the first years and let himself appreciate it, the enchanted ceiling cycling through late evening cloud, the 4 long tables glittering with candlelight, the rows of older students turned to watch them file in. He appreciated it the way you appreciate a very good piece of theater, fully, and without being manipulated by it. At the staff table, he identified Dumbledore immediately. Not because he'd been told what to look for, Ragnok had deliberately not described him beyond the basics, because Harry had asked him not to. He'd wanted his first impression to be unfiltered. But a man at the center of the long table with a silver beard that reached his waist and eyes that moved across the incoming first years with the specific attention of someone checking inventory was not difficult to identify. Harry looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Dumbledore looked back. In those 2 seconds, Harry registered, sharp. Patient. Accustomed to being the most important person in every room, not arrogantly but factually, the way gravity is factual. Watching Harry with the careful warmth of someone managing a long-term investment they're very fond of. Harry looked away first. Not because he felt compelled to, because there was no advantage in letting the man know he'd been assessed. The sorting hat came out. It was old and patched and sang a song about the 4 houses that Harry listened to with one ear while he watched the staff table from the corner of his eye. Several teachers looked at him with the particular attention that his name on a list would produce. Quirrell, the defense teacher, whose turban was doing something with ambient magic that Harry filed immediately as investigate. McGonagall, sharp-faced and precise, who looked at him with the expression of someone who had been told to expect something and was reserving judgment. A few others. Granger, Hermione. Hermione sat on the stool and the hat touched her head and said Gryffindor within 10 seconds, which seemed to please her while also appearing to frustrate her slightly, as if she'd been hoping for a longer conversation. Longbottom, Neville. The hat took a while with Neville. Long enough that Neville's knuckles went white on the stool's edge. Harry watched it happen and thought about what Ragnok had told him, another suppressed child, another stolen potential, though in Neville's case the suppressors were well-meaning and closer to home. The hat said Gryffindor, and something relaxed in Neville's face that might have been relief or might have been something deeper, the feeling of being placed correctly, finally. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not the polite quiet of transitions, the held breath quiet of an audience who've been waiting for the main event and aren't sure it's real yet. Harry walked to the stool, sat down, and felt the hat drop over his eyes. Well, said the hat, directly into his mind with the comfortable familiarity of something that had been doing this for 1,000 years. This is unusual. Is it? Harry thought back. Most students come in here with a mess of fears and ambitions and loyalties all tangled together. You're remarkably tidy. A pause that felt like someone reading a very long document very quickly. And remarkably deep. I haven't felt a core like this actually I don't think I've felt a core like this, full stop. Harry waited. You do well in any house. But you know that. Another pause. You also know which house is expected of you. I know what Dumbledore wants, Harry thought. And I don't choose things based on what other people want. The hat made a sound that might have been a laugh. Gryffindor has courage. Slytherin has ambition and cunning. Ravenclaw has intelligence and learning. Hufflepuff has loyalty and work. A beat. You have all of them, which is rarer than most people know, and you have them in a configuration I haven't sorted before. Someone who is not afraid, not ambitious for the conventional rewards, deeply intelligent, and loyal to things that haven't proven themselves yet. It seemed to settle. I'm going to put you where you'll grow the most. Where you'll find the people who'll matter. Where the story that's coming will make the most sense. Where's that? Harry thought. Where do you want to go? Harry thought about Neville on the stool, knuckles white. He thought about Ron on the train, ears going red, honest in the uncomplicated way of someone who hadn't learned to hide yet. He thought about Hermione's hand extended for the book and the grace with which she'd been wrong. Gryffindor, Harry thought. Gryffindor. The hat shouted. The table of red and gold erupted. Harry took the hat off, set it on the stool for McGonagall to collect, and walked to the Gryffindor table with the same measured pace he used for everything. People were staring. He sat down next to Neville, who was still looking slightly stunned, and said, "You good?" "I think so," Neville said. It took a while. It always takes longer with the interesting ones, Harry said, which he had no particular evidence for but which made Neville sit up slightly, and that had been the point. The feast was extraordinary. Harry ate everything, with the specific thoroughness of someone who had grown up in a house where food security was conditional. He answered questions from the older Gryffindors with the concise warmth of someone who found people interesting without finding attention interesting, which seemed to confuse the ones who'd been expecting either fame blindness or fame arrogance. Percy Weasley, Ron's older brother, prefect, the energy of someone who'd made following rules his personality, gave Harry a formal little welcome speech that Harry thanked him for with complete sincerity. Fred and George Weasley, twins, who had already decided that Harry was going to be excellent simply because he'd answered every one of their test questions with a straight face and one comeback that had made them look at each other with the specific delight of people who found a worthy opponent. At the end of the feast, Dumbledore stood. He spoke about the start of term. He was a very good speaker, Harry noticed this with professional detachment. He had the gift of warmth at scale, of making a hall of several hundred people feel personally addressed. His eyes swept the student body and landed on Harry twice, casually, the way a person's eyes naturally find something they're glad to see. Harry returned each look with calm neutrality. Nothing on his face. Nothing in his posture. Just a first-year student sitting at the Gryffindor table listening to the start-of-term announcements. Dumbledore's gaze moved on. Quirrell's, however, didn't. Harry waited until the man looked away and then spent the walk up to the dormitories thinking about what was living under the turban that required a man to wrap his entire head and exude a low-level aura of wrongness that tickled Harry's magic like a splinter under a fingernail. He'd had a theory since the train. The theory had a name. He would need more information before he said it out loud. The Gryffindor common room was red and gold and warm, a fire burning in a hearth that seemed bigger than was architecturally necessary. Harry sat in a chair near the window while the other first-years explored and chattered, and thought about the layout of the school he'd memorized from Hogwarts, a history, and considered how much of it was accurate. Neville sat in the chair across from him, toad box in his lap, with the look of someone trying to decide whether to speak. "Ask," Harry said. "How are you so calm?" Neville asked. Harry considered the question honestly. "I've known what was coming for a while," he said. "Hogwarts, the fame, Dumbledore. I had time to think about how I wanted to handle it." "How did you know I had help?" He looked at Neville. "You were supposed to be the boy who lived, weren't you? The prophecy could have pointed to you." Neville went very still. "How do you know about the prophecy?" "I told you. I read a lot." He kept his voice easy, unaccusatory. "And I think the reason you're here and not in Ravenclaw is that someone's been telling you that you're not as smart as you are." A long silence. The fire crackled. "My Gran," Neville said, very quietly. "She keeps comparing me to my dad. She doesn't mean it badly." He paused. "I think. You knew that the prophecy could have applied to you," Harry said. "That means you've read it, or read about it, and worked through the logic. That's not what people who aren't smart do." Neville looked at him with the complicated expression of someone receiving information they'd wanted for a long time from an unexpected source. "Your core," he started, and then stopped. "What?" "In the Great Hall, when you sat down. The room felt different. Like the air changed." Neville looked uncertain. "Am I mad?" "No," Harry said. "You're more perceptive than people have told you." Harry was a month into term before Dumbledore made his first direct move. It came as an invitation, a note delivered by McGonagall during charms, politely worded, requesting that Harry visit the headmaster's office at 4 o'clock on Thursday. Harry read it, folded it, thanked McGonagall, and placed it in his inside pocket next to his wand. He was there at 4 o'clock precisely. Dumbledore's office was a statement. Portraits of previous headmasters on every wall, each one watching with the carefully cultivated appearance of sleeping. Instruments everywhere, silver and spinning, the magical equivalent of a room that was trying to establish credentials. A phoenix on a perch near the window, magnificent and warm-eyed. And behind the enormous desk, Albus Dumbledore, in deep purple robes with silver moons, looking exactly like what he was, the most powerful man in a world that Harry was 2 months into navigating. Harry sat down in the offered chair and looked at him. "Harry," Dumbledore said, with the warmth of someone who'd been practicing this for years. "I'm so glad we have a chance to talk properly. I've been looking forward to it." "Professor," Harry said. "How are you finding Hogwarts? Your teachers speak very highly of you already. Professor Flitwick, in particular, seems quite delighted." "Charms is interesting," Harry said. "The theory's deep." "Indeed it is." Dumbledore smiled. The smile was very good. "I want you to know, Harry, that my door is always open to you. You have no family in the wizarding world that you know well, and I feel something of a responsibility. Your parents were known to me, and dear to me, and I hope you know that how did my parents die?" Harry asked. A pause so brief most people would have missed it. Dumbledore's expression adjusted from warm to warmly sorrowful. "They were killed by Lord Voldemort. A dark wizard of enormous power, I know who Voldemort is," Harry said. "I mean the specific circumstances. What happened in the house? How he found them." "A complex and painful topic," Dumbledore said, "perhaps better discussed when they were under the Fidelius charm," Harry said. "Peter Pettigrew was the secret keeper. He betrayed them. He kept his voice conversational. Sirius Black was blamed. He's been in Azkaban for 10 years without a trial. I've filed a formal complaint with the DMLE about that." Another pause. Longer. The silver instrument spun. "You've been very thorough," Dumbledore said. His voice was still warm. His eyes were not precisely what they'd been 2 minutes ago. "I had questions. I looked for answers." Harry looked back at him steadily. "I wanted to ask you directly, did you authorize Sirius Black's imprisonment?" "I was not in a position, you were chief warlock of the Wizengamot," Harry said. "A prisoner was held without trial for 10 years. Under your tenure." He kept his face pleasant, his voice mild. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking what happened." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. This was, Harry suspected, unusual. He looked at Harry with an expression that was new, not the managed warmth of the opening, not the adjustment of the first interruption. This was the expression of a very intelligent man recalibrating. "You are not what I expected," Dumbledore said. Gently. Perhaps honestly. "People say that," Harry said. "Harry, I want to help you. The world you've inherited is a complicated one, and there are dangers that, I appreciate that," Harry said, and meant it, carefully and precisely, cutting off the rest of the sentence. "I'm sure we'll work well together." He stood. "Thank you for the invitation, Professor. I should get back. Hermione and I are working through the charms theory this evening." He was at the door before Dumbledore spoke again. "Your scar," Dumbledore said. "Has it been bothering you at all?" Harry turned back. He kept his face open, curious, a student answering a teacher's question. "Not really." "Why?" "Oh, just a precaution. Let me know if it does." The warmth was back, seamless. "Good evening, Harry." "Good evening, Professor." Harry walked down the spiral staircase at the same pace he'd walked up it, through the corridors to the Gryffindor Tower, up to the dormitory, where he sat on his bed and turned the conversation over in his mind like examining a gem for flaws. Dumbledore had tried 3 things in 15 minutes. The warm surrogate grandfather routine. The concerned mentor positioning. The exit question about the scar, which was, Harry was fairly sure, a gentle probe for the Horcrux fragment that Dumbledore didn't know Harry knew about. None of them had landed. Harry felt the gentle, constant warmth of his core in his chest and thought about Ragnok saying documentation is the only weapon that cannot be deflected, and about Bonebreaker saying what they were afraid of was justified, and about Erica in Zurich handing him his wand with both hands. He pulled out a piece of parchment and began a letter to Ragnok. The defense class confirmed his theory on a Thursday morning in October. Quirrell had spent the first month teaching at a level of competence so performatively below his actual ability that it took Harry until the third class to realize it was deliberate, not laziness or nerves but concealment, a practiced underperformance designed to look like exactly what it presented as, a nervous, incompetent teacher muddling through. But the magic emanating from the back of his head was getting stronger as the weeks went on, responding to proximity to Harry in a way that had a specific flavor. Horcrux. A fragment of Voldemort's soul, living in Quirrell's head, feeding on the ambient energy of a classroom full of young magic users and specifically oriented toward Harry every time Harry entered the room. Harry did not tell anyone yet. He told Ragnok in a letter, using the private code they developed, and Ragnok wrote back within 2 days, noted. Do not engage. Observe. Followed by 3 lines of analysis that confirmed what Harry had already worked out. Followed by, he is testing the school's defenses. There is something here he wants. Find out what. It was Hermione who found it, technically, though Harry had been looking in the same direction. She came to him in the library on a Sunday evening with a book open to a page about the Philosopher's Stone, and said, "Third floor corridor," with the clipped certainty of someone presenting a conclusion. Harry looked up. Forbidden. The one Dumbledore specifically warned us about in the start-of-term speech in a way that was designed to make curious students want to investigate? Hermione blinked. You think it was deliberate? I think Dumbledore moved the stone here from Gringotts specifically, Harry said, and watched her face process this. And I think he knew curious, capable students would find out about it and start investigating. Which is useful if you want to give a dark wizard a trail to follow. He put it here as a trap. For Voldemort, Harry said. Yes. Ron, who was sitting across the table ostensibly doing homework and actually listening to everything, said, he's using the school. He's using students. Not directly, Harry said. But the architecture of it is designed so that a certain type of person, bright, brave, morally motivated, ends up engaged with the problem in a way that serves his strategy. He looked at Ron. You, me, Hermione. Convenient, isn't it, that we all ended up friends? We ended up friends because Hermione nearly got killed by a troll and we saved her, Ron said. Yes, Harry agreed. In a school that should not have had an accessible troll. On Halloween. When the one teacher positioned to exploit the resulting bond of trust was already in the building. A silence. Ron said, and stopped. He's not malevolent, Harry said. He thinks he's protecting people. He thinks this is all necessary. He closed his own book. That doesn't mean we're going to help him run his play. So what do we do? Hermione asked. Nothing yet, Harry said. We learn. We watch. And when the time comes, we handle it ourselves, on our terms. He looked at both of them. Quirrell is going to make his move before the end of the year. When he does, I want to be ready, not surprised. So, Hermione, can you find out everything about the protections on whatever's down that corridor? She already had a notebook out. I already started. Ron, you grew up in this world. You know things about how wizards think and act that I've missed. I need that context. Ron looked like he'd been given an unexpected present. Yeah. Obviously. I've got 6 older brothers too, so. Exactly. Harry picked up his book. Neville's going to be useful too. He knows herbology better than any of us and at least one of those protections is going to involve plants. You know that already? Hermione said. Professor Sprout's been cross about missing Devil's Snare for 2 months, Harry said. She keeps looking at Dumbledore when she mentions it in class. He turned a page. The library settled back into its working quiet, and the fire crackled, and 3 11-year-olds bent over their homework with the industrious focus of people who were doing much more than homework. Dumbledore called Harry to his office 2 more times that term. The conversations had the same structure: warmth, gentle probing, the carefully managed suggestion that Harry was loved and cared for and guided. Each time, Harry was present and open and gave nothing. Each time, he wrote a letter to Ragnok afterward. The letters were building into something. He could feel it. On the 1st of December, he received a reply from the DMLE about Sirius Black. Not an action notice, not yet. An acknowledgement of receipt and the information that the case was under review. Signed by someone 3 levels below Fudge, which meant it was being handled at the level of people who still believed in procedure rather than politics. It was exactly where Harry needed it. He wrote to Ragnok. Ragnok wrote back, "Good. Let it move. Don't push. Pushing makes noise." Harry folded the letter and put it in the drawer with the others and went down to breakfast. Quirrell watched him from the staff table with Voldemort's hunger. Dumbledore watched him from the center with something older and more complicated. McGonagall watched him with her reserved assessment, and he thought, not for the first time, that she was the most honest person on that table, the one who'd be hardest to fool and who'd feel the betrayal most when she found out what she hadn't been told. He'd made a decision about McGonagall. He was waiting for the right moment. There was something in her that deserved truth before everything came apart, and he was going to make sure she had it. Just not yet. He sat down at the Gryffindor table between Neville and Hermione, helped himself to toast, and planned his morning. He had Transfiguration first. McGonagall had started coming to their practical classes with the expression of someone who'd arrived expecting a competent first year and kept finding something that didn't match the assessment. 2 weeks ago she'd asked Harry to remain after class and had said, in the way she said things, direct, no cushioning, "Who taught you to do that?" "I read ahead," Harry had said. She'd looked at him for a long moment. "The modification you performed on that match was 6th year standard." A pause. "Are you aware that your wand is not standard manufacture?" "It's from a Swiss wand maker," Harry said. "Erica. She specializes in non-standard cores." "Thunderbird," McGonagall said, and it wasn't a question. "I haven't seen one since 1962. Another pause. "You should be careful not to, that is, you might want to. I'm not hiding it, Professor," Harry said. "I'm just not making a display of it." She'd looked at him with an expression he'd spent 2 weeks turning over. Not suspicion. Not concern, exactly. Something closer to the expression of a person standing at a point where a road forked, not yet sure which branch they were on. He was going to tell her. He'd decided. He just needed the year to play out a little further first. He needed Quirrell to move, and the stone to be secured, and the evidence from Gringotts to be one step closer to ready. Then he'd sit down with Minerva McGonagall and tell her everything, and he'd watch what she did with it. He spread marmalade on his toast, read the morning correspondence, and waited with the steady patience of someone who had learned patience from people who measured time in centuries. The toast was good. Hogwarts was very good. And Harry Potter, the real one, the unbound one, the one Dumbledore had never met and hadn't planned for, had arrived. Chapter 4, The Architecture of Secrets. Quirrell made his move on a Tuesday. Harry knew it was coming the way you know a storm is coming, not from a single sign but from the accumulation of them, the pressure drop of small details that stop adding up to nothing and start adding up to something. Quirrell had been absent from the staff table for 3 days. The third-floor corridor had gone quiet in the specific way that places go quiet when the thing that was making noise has moved. And Voldemort's presence, which Harry had been tracking all year the way you track a cold spot in a room, had shifted from ambient to directional. He told Hermione and Ron at breakfast on Tuesday morning. "Tonight," he said, spreading butter on toast with the calm of someone discussing a schedule change. Hermione looked up from her notes. Ron stopped eating, which for Ron was the clearest possible signal that something serious had registered. Neville, who'd been eating porridge and watching Harry with the quiet attention he'd developed over months of figuring out when Harry was and wasn't telling them everything, set down his spoon. "You're certain?" Hermione asked. Quirrell didn't come down for meals yesterday, Harry said. The stone's been moved once already. I heard Fluffy reacting differently 2 nights ago, more agitated, like something in his space had changed. And Dumbledore left the school this morning. He left. Ron said. Received an urgent ministry summons. Harry looked at Ron steadily. The timing is convenient. A pause. You think Dumbledore planned it, Neville said. Not a question. I think Dumbledore has been engineering this situation all year. I think he expected the trap to be sprung by Voldemort and a small group of capable students who'd handle it on his behalf. Harry drank his tea. I think we're the capable students. I think tonight is the night. So we go, Ron said. We go, Harry confirmed. But we go prepared, and we go on our terms. Hermione, the devil's snare. Walk toward the light source, she said immediately. Don't struggle. The more you fight it, the tighter it holds. If there's no light, Lumos Maxima directly into the center mass. Ron, the chess set. Ron had been thinking about the chess problem since November and had spent so many evenings staring at chessboards in the common room that Fred had started calling him Bobby Fischer, which Ron had explained to Harry was a Muggle reference that he'd looked up because Fred wouldn't tell him what it meant and it was clearly an insult. I've got it mapped, Ron said. 3 moves. We won't need to sacrifice a piece. He paused. Probably. Neville, you're staying back as signal, Harry said. Neville straightened. I can come, I know you can. That's not why I need you here. Harry looked at him directly. If we don't come back by midnight, you go to McGonagall. Not Dumbledore. McGonagall. You tell her everything, where we went, what we found, and then you give her this. He reached into his inside pocket and produced a sealed envelope. Everything's in there. Everything. Neville looked at the envelope. It's a summary of what I know about the stone, Quirrell, Voldemort, and a few other things she needs to know. A beat. She'll want to read it. Make sure she does before she does anything. Neville took the envelope with the particular care of someone who understood that the weight of an object wasn't always physical. Okay, he said. Good. Harry finished his toast. We've got a full day of classes first. Don't do anything that looks like we know what tonight is. Ron stared at him. You're going to sit through double herbology knowing that tonight, yes, Harry said pleasantly. And so are you. Try to look bored. Double herbology was, in fact, genuinely interesting because Professor Sprout was covering properties of venomous tentacula in the context of defensive magical botany, and Harry spent a portion of it wondering if Dumbledore knew how competent his staff was and whether it occurred to him that competent people might notice things he hadn't intended them to. Sprout was sharp. She'd noticed her devil's snare was missing for the protections below and had made a face about it every time it came up in lessons, a face that said clearly she'd been told it was for good reason but hadn't been convinced. Charms was Flitwick, who was genuinely delighted by Harry and Hermione both and spent the lesson bouncing between their workbenches with the energy of a man whose students had exceeded every expectation and who felt personally vindicated. Harry performed the required charm, helped Ron with the wrist movement, and spent a focused 20 minutes thinking through the logic of the mirror that Ragnok had mentioned in passing, the erased mirror, the final protection. The one designed to stop someone who wanted to use the stone from getting it. The logic was neat. Elegant, even. Only someone who wanted to find the stone but not use it could retrieve it. Which meant Dumbledore had built the last layer specifically for one person. For a student with enough courage and enough selflessness to get through everything else and then walk up to a mirror that showed them their deepest desire. Harry had read enough of Dumbledore's architecture by now to recognize the fingerprints. He'd also worked out that the mirror's logic could be satisfied multiple ways. They went after dinner, while the castle was settling into its nighttime rhythms and the corridors were doing the specific quiet of a building full of sleeping people. Harry had his wand out, not dramatically, just in his hand, the Thunderbird feather warmth of it steady against his palm. Hermione had a cast lumos hovering above her shoulder and her expression of concentrated focus. Ron had the chess theory running behind his eyes in the visible way that Ron's brain worked. Fluffy was already asleep. Harry had done that, not with music, which was Hagrid's method and which he'd known about and discarded, but with a targeted application of intent, the same instinctive magic that had grown the grass and fixed the boiler, aimed at the enormous sleeping brain of a three-headed dog with the thought sleep, you're fine, sleep, and Fluffy had given a rumbling sigh and closed 6 eyes. The trapdoor was below. The devil's snare knew them immediately, it knew Harry's magic specifically, rearing toward him the way plants always did, and Harry touched it without concern and said, quietly, enough, which shouldn't have worked but which the snare responded to by simply releasing, the whole mass of it flowing back to the walls like a tide going out. Hermione looked at him. I know, Harry said. We'll discuss it later. The winged keys were a puzzle. Harry spotted the right one in under a minute, older than the others, one wing slightly bent, the specific wear pattern of a key that had been used and replaced but not made new. He pointed it out to Hermione, who caught it with a summoning charm on the second try, and they were through. Ron sat down at the chessboard and studied it for 40 seconds and then moved 3 pieces with the decisive certainty of someone who had done this in his head many times already. The opposing pieces moved. Ron responded. The path opened. Did you have to sacrifice anything? Harry asked. No, Ron said, and he was clearly very pleased about this, a satisfaction that was about more than chess and they both knew it. The troll was unconscious before they found it, already dealt with, which meant Quirrell had come through here recently. Harry crouched near it for a moment, reading the magical residue, timing the unconsciousness. An hour, maybe 90 minutes ahead of them. The potion room was Snape's, logic puzzle, 7 bottles, a small fire in front and a larger one behind. Hermione solved it in 3 minutes, her face doing the thing it did when she was using the part of her brain that operated at a different speed than the rest of her. She identified the bottle that let you go forward, the bottle that let you go back, and handed Harry the forward bottle. This only gets one person through, she said. The bottle's too small. You go back, Harry said. Harry, Ron needs someone with him and you're the one who can navigate back through the keys and the snare. He held her gaze. I'm going forward. Hermione looked at him for a moment with an expression that was conducting several arguments simultaneously, and then arrived at the one she could actually win. Come back, she said. Not a request. Obviously, Harry said. The final chamber was already occupied. Not Snape, which had been the working theory for most of the year among other students. Quirrell stood in front of the mirror of Eriste with his back to the door and his head unwrapped, the second face on the back of his skull turned away, and he was speaking to the mirror in a low rapid voice that had the texture of frustration. On the ground beside him, the purple flames that marked the boundary between rooms had been extinguished. Harry walked in. Quirrell turned. The face on the back of his head turned too, and Harry looked at it, really looked, without flinching, and felt Voldemort's presence like a cold hand placed flat against his chest. Not against his scar. Against his core, the full unbound weight of it, testing, probing, recognizing. Potter, said Voldemort's voice, from the back of Quirrell's head. It had no body, no resonance, the voice of something existing on borrowed architecture. You came. Seemed like the night for it, Harry said. He was looking at the mirror. The mirror showed him, not his family, not wealth or fame or power. It showed him standing where he was standing, in this room, with an empty space beside him that felt like potential rather than absence. It showed him a world with Voldemort defeated and Dumbledore's deceptions dismantled and a life that was simply his, unmanaged, undesigned, his to build as he chose. No grand destiny. No sacrificial role. Just freedom. The stone was in his pocket. He'd felt it appear the moment he looked at the mirror with want for it neutralized, not by selflessness but by something more complicated, by knowing, clearly, that he needed the stone secured not for use but for removal, that having it in his pocket meant Voldemort couldn't have it, and that was sufficient. The mirror's logic was simple. It gave the stone to someone who'd already done their wanting somewhere else. Quirrell rushed him. Harry stepped aside. Not dramatically. Not with any flourish. He simply was not where he'd been, the movement clean and instinctive, and Quirrell stumbled past him and turned and rushed again, and Harry caught his wrist. What happened then was not deliberate in the sense of being planned. It was deliberate in the sense of being chosen, in the half-second available for choice, with full understanding of the consequence. Harry's magic, full, unbound, the vast ocean of it, roused by Voldemort's proximity and the aggression of the attack, ran down his arm and into the contact point, and Quirrell's skin blistered where Harry's hand touched his wrist. Voldemort screamed from the back of the skull. Quirrell clawed at his own head, trying to reach backward, trying to do something that a man with a possessing spirit living in his skull couldn't coherently do, and Harry held on and felt the wrongness of Voldemort's presence burning against his magic the way oil burns against water, incompatible, mutually destructive. The scar on his forehead blazed white and Harry ignored it, turned into the pain the way Ragnok had taught him to turn into difficulty rather than away from it, and pushed. Not a spell. Not an incantation. Just the full directed weight of everything he was, pointed at the wrong thing living in the back of this poor man's skull, and the word in his head was out. The scream tore through 3 octaves and then there was nothing. Quirrell collapsed. Harry let go and stood over him and breathed. The scar was cooling. The room was very quiet. The purple flames, he noticed absently, had come back on their own. He looked at the stone in his palm. Then he looked up at the mirror. His reflection looked back. Normal. Alive. The empty space beside it still there, still potential. He put the stone in his pocket, reached down, checked Quirrell's pulse, present, weak, the man needed a healer immediately, and walked to the doorway. He sent a burst of his magic upward through the stone of the floor, a sharp clean pulse, the magical equivalent of a distress flare, aimed at the ambient monitoring enchantments that ran through the school. Someone would come. He sat down against the wall near Quirrell to wait, took the stone out of his pocket and held it in the lamplight, and thought about the year. McGonagall arrived in under 10 minutes, which confirmed she'd been paying attention. She came through the purple flames with her wand out and stopped short at the sight of the room, Quirrell on the ground, Harry sitting against the wall, the mirror behind him, the stone in his open palm. She looked at all of it. Then she looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter," she said, and her voice had the quality of a woman assembling control over a reaction that had tried to come out unassembled. "Are you hurt?" "No," Harry said. "Quirrell needs a healer. He was being possessed by Voldemort, the possession broke when I made contact with him, but he needs immediate attention." McGonagall pointed her wand at the ceiling and sent a Patronus streaking upward, then crossed to Quirrell and crouched beside him with professional efficiency. Her hands moved over him in the assessment pattern Harry recognized from Bonebreaker's diagnostic work. Something in her face tightened. "The stone," she said, without looking up. "Here." Harry held it out. She finally looked at him, and the look had something new in it, not the assessment reserve, not the carefully maintained evaluation. Something rawer, working through implications at speed. "You knew about this before tonight," she said. "It wasn't an accusation." "Yes. And you didn't come to me." "No," Harry said. "Not yet." He held her gaze. "Professor, I need to give you something. I was going to have Neville deliver it at midnight if we didn't come back, but since you're here," he reached into his inside pocket and produced the sealed envelope, the same letter but the original copy, and held it out. She took it. Looked at it. Looked at him. "What's in here?" she said. "Everything," Harry said. "I need you to read it. Tonight, if possible. Alone, before you talk to Dumbledore about any of this." He kept his voice even. "I know how that sounds. I know you'll want to take this to him first. But please read it first. A beat. What I'm asking you to do is the hardest thing I know how to ask, I'm asking you to trust that I wouldn't ask it without a reason. McGonagall held the envelope for a long moment. More staff were arriving through the flames, Flitwick, Sprout, Snape with his wand out and his eyes moving between Harry and the mirror with an expression that was calculating several things simultaneously. Harry looked at Snape and felt the man's magical presence, complicated, layered, dark in the way that a deep river is dark, light blocked by depth rather than by nature. Snape looked at the stone in Harry's hand. Something moved through his expression that was gone before Harry could name it. Quite the adventure, Potter, Snape said, with the particular flatness he applied to Harry in public, which Harry had clocked by the third week of term as performance rather than feeling. Professor, Harry said, neutrally. The stone should be secured, Snape said, to McGonagall. Agreed, Harry said, and stood and handed it to McGonagall, who took it with the automatic authority of a deputy headmistress who'd just been handed a legendary magical object by an 11-year-old and was managing the experience with impressive composure. She looked at the envelope in her other hand. She put it in her robes. Harry had a very strong feeling she would read it that night. She did. He knew because at breakfast the next morning she arrived at the staff table 17 minutes late. McGonagall, who arrived at the staff table first every morning without exception, arrived 17 minutes late with the specific quality of someone who'd been awake all night and was using discipline to stand up straight. She sat down and poured her tea and looked at Harry across the hall with an expression that was doing several things at once, and then looked away. Harry ate his porridge. That afternoon she came to him in the library, which was empty of anyone except Hermione, who she asked to give them a moment with a directness that Hermione responded to by gathering her books and leaving without argument because she could read a room. McGonagall sat down across from Harry. She placed the envelope on the table between them. The letter inside it had been folded and unfolded multiple times. The edges were soft with handling. "How long?" she said, and stopped. Tried again. "How long have you known about the Gringotts matter?" 6 years, Harry said. The color in her face did something. Not dramatic, McGonagall didn't do dramatic, but a shift, as if something had been placed on a scale and the scale had tipped in a direction she'd feared. 6 years, she repeated. "Since you were 5, Harry said. I wandered into Gringotts. A curse breaker named Ragnok ran a diagnostic." He kept his voice even, the same way he kept his voice even in Dumbledore's office, not to conceal feeling but because clarity mattered more than emphasis. "He found 112 soul bindings. Each one siphoning my magical core and channeling the output to a vault registered to the Order of the Phoenix." "That's not," she stopped. "It's documented," Harry said. "Every binding dated, mapped, and removed over 6 years. The channeling network traced to the vault. The vault traced to Dumbledore's authorization." He paused. "Gringotts has been building the legal file for 6 years. The DMLE has already received an initial complaint regarding Sirius Black's illegal imprisonment. There is a body of evidence that I think will be, when you've had time to think about what you want to do with your part of this, impossible to refute." McGonagall looked at him for a very long moment. There was something happening in her face that wasn't what Harry had expected. He'd expected anger, at Dumbledore, at the situation, possibly redirected at Harry for not telling her sooner. Instead what he saw was a kind of reckoning, a person who was intelligent and principled encountering proof that something she'd accepted as good had not been, and deciding in real time what she was made of. "You should have told me sooner," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "I wasn't sure I could trust you and I didn't have enough of the evidence ready and I needed to see how the year went." He held her gaze. "I'm telling you now." "Why now?" "Because you came through those flames last night with your wand out and you knelt down next to Quirrell and you didn't ask me to explain myself, you checked whether I was hurt." He kept his voice simple. "And because I think you didn't know. About the bindings. About any of it." The silence went on for a while. "I didn't," McGonagall said, quietly. I want to state plainly that I didn't know." "I know," Harry said. I chose not to see things that should have been. She stopped herself. That's not the same as not knowing, Mr. Potter. He looked at her with something that was respect, genuinely felt. No, he agreed. But it's different from complicity. And it matters what you do now. She picked up the envelope and put it back in her robes. She sat straight, the way she always sat, as if her spine had made a professional commitment. What do you need from me? Not yet, Harry said. You need time to think about this properly. I don't need you to charge into Dumbledore's office tonight. I don't want that, and it would hurt more than help. He paused. I need you to know. I need someone on the inside of the staff here who knows. And I need you to watch, and think, and when I come to you with specific things I need to know you'll consider them seriously. You are 11 years old, McGonagall said. I'm aware. She looked at him. He looked back. Very well, she said, and stood. For what it's worth, Mr. Potter, she paused, and the careful professional distance slipped for just a moment, and what came through looked like a woman standing in the wreckage of something she'd helped build without knowing what it was built for. Your mother would be, she stopped. Reapplied the distance. I hope you sleep, Mr. Potter. That's all. She left. Harry sat alone in the library for a while. Hedwig, who'd been perched on a bookcase above him and pretending to be decorative, flew down and landed on the table and looked at him with the expression she used when she felt he needed company but also needed her to not make a large deal of it. I know, Harry said. She clicked her beak and looked out the window. Summer came in a rush of exams that Harry found interesting rather than stressful, the knowledge sitting in his head organized and accessible in the way that things you understand rather than memorize tend to be. He finished his last exam, Charms Practical, which involved a levitation charm that Harry performed with a precision Flitwick wrote a margin note about, and walked back to the common room and sat down and wrote 3 letters. One to Ragnok, the year's events summarized. Quirrell. The Stone. McGonagall. Status of the DMLE file on Sirius. Requests for specific documentation to be prepared for the next phase. 1 to Griphook, a query about the property in the Scottish Highlands, whether it was in condition for occupancy, and the cost of making it so. 1 to Erica in Zurich, a thank you, because good work deserved acknowledgement, and because she'd written to ask how the wand was performing and Harry had been meaning to reply for weeks. He sent them with Hedwig, who departed with the dignity of someone performing an important service, and went down to dinner. Second year arrived like a gear change. Harry came back to Hogwarts taller, the summer having contributed several inches that his second-year robes had been adjusted for, and with the specific quality of someone who had spent their summer doing things more interesting than being on holiday. Which was true. He'd spent July in Zurich meeting with Erica and an associate of hers who studied advanced magical theory, and August alternating between the Scottish Highlands property, which Griphook had organized, competently and without drama, into something habitable, and Gringotts, where Ragnok had delivered the news that the DMLE review of Sirius Black's case had escalated to a formal inquiry. The formal inquiry meant a record. The record meant accountability. The accountability meant, for the first time in 11 years, that someone official was asking why a man had been imprisoned without a trial. Harry did not allow himself to feel premature satisfaction. He'd learned better. But he did sit with it for a moment in Ragnok's office, and Ragnok said nothing and let him sit, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Hogwarts in second year had a different texture. Harry was no longer the widest-eyed new arrival, and the castle had had a year to develop opinions about him. The opinions were, on balance, mixed in an interesting way. The students who valued competence and disliked performance found him reliable. The students who'd been expecting a celebrity and gotten a person who read annotated textbooks and occasionally said things that made teachers pause were uncertain. The students who needed someone to project onto, hero, symbol, narrative anchor, were frustrated by his refusal to cooperate with the projection. The Slytherins had the clearest opinion, which was adversarial and, Harry thought, honest. Draco Malfoy had decided, before ever speaking to Harry, that Harry was a rival, and had spent first year performing this decision in various ways that Harry had navigated by refusing to make it reciprocal. Malfoy was a specific type of intelligent, strategic but limited by the assumption that everyone was operating within the same social framework as him, that status and blood and name were the relevant currencies. Harry's refusal to treat them as such was genuinely confusing to Malfoy, and Harry found the confusion more interesting than anything adversarial. The chamber opened in October. Not the first incident, Mrs. Norris, found petrified on Halloween, which Harry walked past with Ron and Hermione and read the writing on the wall, literally, the message in blood, and felt the specific quality of old Parseltongue magic in the stone around it. He knew what this was immediately. He knew because he'd read about it. He knew because Ragnok had a file on Salazar Slytherin's legacy in the vault records that was 300 years old. And he knew because when he stood near the writing on the wall, he could feel the magic in the stone like a vibration in a specific key, and the key matched something in his own core in a way that was less surprise than recognition. He was a Parselmouth. He'd known since July, when he'd had a conversation with a garden snake in the Scottish Highlands Properties herb garden without realizing he was doing it until the snake had said something back. He had not told anyone yet. He told Hermione on the walk back to the common room, quietly, with Ron on his other side, in the tone of someone presenting a relevant data point rather than making a confession. Parselmouth, Hermione said, not loudly. Yes. Since when? Knew since July. Probably always, I might have been doing it occasionally before and just not noticed. A pause. I can feel the magic in those walls. It's old Parselmouth spellwork. Chamber of Secrets level. Slytherin built something here and it's been activated. The monster, Ron said. The voice you heard, Basilisk, Harry said. Has to be. Size of the petrifications, the indirect sight, Mrs. Norris saw the reflection in the water. Killing gaze that petrifies through reflection. Roost in the pipes because it's been down there for 1,000 years and needs to travel through the plumbing. He looked at Ron. We need the snake. Which means we need to find the chamber. We need to be Slytherins, Hermione said. A pause. Polyjuice, Harry said. Hermione's expression was the specific expression of someone who has arrived at the same conclusion and is both pleased about it and aware that it has serious logistical challenges. That's a 6th-year potion. Can you make it? A beat. Yes, she said. The Polyjuice operation took 2 months, which Harry spent in parallel working on the more pressing problem, Ginny Weasley. He'd noticed her in September, too pale, too tired, the specific flatness of someone under an influence they were unaware of. He'd noticed the diary in November. He'd put it together over December. He told Ron in December, carefully, in private, in the way you tell someone that someone they love is in danger, which was, directly, completely, without softening the edges, because softening it would have been an insult to Ron's ability to handle it. Ron sat with it for a long time. She found a diary, Ron said. Yes. And it's a piece of Voldemort's soul, Harry said. A Horcrux. Old magic, very dark. The diary talks back and it takes what it's given, her trust, her thoughts, her loneliness, and it uses it to act through her. He paused. She's been opening the chamber. Not knowingly. She doesn't know she's doing it. We have to get the diary, Ron said, in the voice he used when he was frightened and was converting the fear into direction. Yes, Harry said. Before she's used up entirely. He kept his voice even. She's going to be fine, Ron. We're going to get there in time. How do you know? Harry looked at him. Because I'm not going to let it go any other way. Something settled in Ron's face that wasn't quite certainty but was the decision to take Harry at his word, which was its own kind of certainty. Okay, he said. What do we do? The Polyjuice worked. Harry went in as Goyle, which was an uncomfortable hour in every possible sense, and navigated the Slytherin common room with Hermione beside him as Millicent Bulstrode and Ron as Crabbe, and found out nothing useful about the chamber but did locate the origin point of Lucius Malfoy's involvement, because Draco, freed from normal social performance by the presence of what he believed were his two largest admirers, talked about his father the way people talk about things when they're showing off. Father gave the Weasley girl the diary. He said it would cause trouble for the family. He said Dumbledore would be removed if enough students got hurt. Harry filed this. Two birds, Lucius Malfoy using Ginny Weasley as a delivery mechanism for a Horcrux he'd perhaps found among Voldemort's effects and recognized as useful. Not full understanding of what it was, perhaps. But useful. He wrote to Griphook. He asked about the Malfoy vault, specifically the inventory of items acquired after Voldemort's first fall, specifically whether any such inventory had been audited. Griphook wrote back in 3 days, working on it. The chamber was found in February. Not through polyjuice or guesswork but through Harry standing in the bathroom on the second floor where Moaning Myrtle resided and listening to the pipes. He listened for 20 minutes while Myrtle complained about various things and the pipes made the specific sounds of old stone plumbing carrying magic through it, and then he said, in the sibilant fluid syllables of Parseltongue, open, to the sink that had always seemed fractionally different from the others. The sink opened. He went down alone. He had told no one he was going. Not Ron, not Hermione, not McGonagall. This was deliberate. This was the piece of it that was his, not his destiny, not his assigned role, but his choice, made with clear eyes and full information, to go into the chamber of a 1,000-year-old dark wizard's architecture and handle what was there. He had his wand. He had 6 years of theory, 2 years of practical, and a magical core that had spent the last year operating without any binding on it at all, doing things in casual moments that made Flitwick look thoughtful and made Snape, once, say nothing at all, which was a kind of reaction Harry had learned to interpret. The chamber was exactly what the book said. Long stone. Serpent motifs everywhere, the aesthetic of a person who had a very clear idea of their own symbolism. And at the end of it, Ginny Weasley lying unconscious on the wet floor, and Tom Riddle standing over her with Harry's wand. Not Harry's wand. Harry's wand was in Harry's hand. The wand Riddle held was Ginny's. Tom Riddle looked like the idea of a handsome young man. Not the reality, the idea. Too perfect in the dim light, with the specific unreality of a thing that was built from impression and memory rather than flesh. He looked at Harry with Voldemort's hunger wearing a teenager's face. Harry Potter, he said. At last. You look younger than I expected, Harry said. Riddle paused. I am a memory, he said, with the patience of explaining something to someone he was expecting to dispose of imminently, made corporeal through the, I know what you are, Harry said. He was looking at Ginny, assessing her breathing, her color, the specific drain of a Horcrux feeding aggressively. She was pale but breathing. Recoverable, if he moved soon enough. Diary fragment Horcrux. 16-year-old Tom Riddle's preserved soul piece, activated through the emotional investment of a vulnerable child, now using her life force to manifest. You need to write in the diary to go back in. He looked at Riddle. But the diary's on the floor behind you. A flicker. Very small. He'd surprised a piece of Voldemort's soul, which Harry found mildly satisfying. You are not what I expected either, Riddle said. People say that. Harry raised his wand. Step away from her. Riddle raised Ginny's wand. You can't. What came out of Harry's wand was not a standard spell. He hadn't thought one at it. What came out was something more fundamental, a blast of raw structured magic that hit the diary fragment at the level of its magical architecture, the same level at which Bonebreaker had worked on his bindings, aimed at the soul piece's connection to physical manifestation and carrying the intent dissolve. Riddle came apart. Not dramatically. Not in pieces. He dissolved from the edges inward, the too perfect face the last thing to go, with an expression on it that Harry couldn't read clearly enough to name. Then he was gone. The basilisk was harder. Harry heard it before he saw it, the dragging weight of it through the stone, enormous and ancient and responding to the absence of its master's voice with the specific confusion of a creature that had been given orders and now had none. Harry turned away from it, watching the reflection in the standing water on the floor, and navigated by reflection and sound until he was close enough. "Stop," he said, in Parseltongue. The basilisk stopped. It was the strangest conversation Harry had ever had. The basilisk was old, extraordinarily old, with the particular consciousness of a creature that had been confined and compelled for centuries, given purpose by a dead man's voice and now uncertain of its own nature. It was not malevolent in any straightforward sense. It was afraid, in the way ancient things are afraid when they no longer know their function. "You were Slytherins," Harry said, in Parseltongue. "Yes," it said. The sound of it through the chamber was like stone grinding on stone. "He's gone. The last piece of him is gone." Harry kept his voice steady, easy, the way he talked to the garden snake in the Highlands. "You don't have to hurt anyone." "Then what am I for?" Harry thought about this honestly. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I'd rather work that out than have you die for someone who was already dead." He paused. "Will you let me pass?" The basilisk was quiet for a long time. The water dripped. Ginny's breathing was steady behind him. "Pass," it said. He picked up Ginny and walked back through the chamber, and the basilisk did not move. Harry carried Ginny out through the pipe, which was a more logistically complicated process than going down had been but which he managed through a combination of levitation charms and stubbornness, and emerged in the bathroom to find McGonagall, Dumbledore, Ron, and Hermione in varying states of urgency. McGonagall took Ginny immediately, practically levitating her toward the hospital wing. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression Harry had not seen on him before. Not the warm management. Not the adjustment. Something beneath both of those, something genuine and unguarded, the expression of a man who has spent years building a chessboard and has just watched someone else's hand move a piece in a direction the board wasn't designed to accommodate. "The chamber?" Dumbledore said. "Cleared," Harry said. "The Horcrux is destroyed. The basilisk is alive and has agreed not to harm anyone. I'd suggest relocating it. I can explain the circumstances when Ginny is stable and you want a full account." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "Sir." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. "Harry," he said, gently. "How do you know what a Horcrux is?" Harry looked back at him with the same calm he used for everything, the same stillness he'd been building since he was 5 years old in a cold-floored marble hall, and said, "I read a lot, Professor." Dumbledore smiled. The smile was very good. Harry went to the hospital wing. He sat beside Ginny's bed while Madame Pomfrey worked and Ron held his sister's hand and nobody said much because some rooms don't need words, and he turned the year over in his mind. The Horcrux in the diary, destroyed. The chamber secured. The basilisk alive and theoretically available as evidence that something had been down there for 1,000 years without the school's official knowledge, which was a fact that had implications. Lucius Malfoy had given the diary to Ginny. That connected Lucius to Voldemort's effects. That was a thread. And Dumbledore knew that Harry knew what Horcruxes were. Which meant Dumbledore's timeline for whatever he was planning had just shifted. He'd wanted a few more years of managed ignorance. He wasn't going to get them. Harry felt his magic settle in his chest, warm and certain and entirely his. He had all summer to plan. He intended to use every hour of it. Chapter 5, The weight of what was stolen. The summer between second and third year was the most productive 3 months of Harry's life. He spent the first 2 weeks at the Highlands property alone, which was how he preferred to do his serious thinking, no noise, no performance, just the stone walls and the view of the loch and Hedwig hunting in the evenings while Harry worked through the problem of Voldemort's Horcruxes with the systematic attention he gave to everything that mattered. He'd known about Horcruxes theoretically since he was 9. Ragnok had a restricted text on dark artifact archaeology that contained a chapter, which Harry had read in the context of understanding what had happened to him as an infant. He'd known there was a soul fragment in his scar since shortly after his 10th birthday, when Bonebreaker had done a deep mapping and found it, not a binding, not something placed there with intent toward Harry specifically, but a lodger, a fragment of Voldemort's soul that had attached itself during the rebounded killing curse and had been sitting there ever since, quiet and separate from Harry's own magical core, like a splinter that hadn't festered but hadn't dissolved either. He'd been thinking about it for 2 years. He had not told Dumbledore, who knew about it and was presumably building a plan around it that Harry was not going to cooperate with. He had not told Ragnok yet, because there were pieces he needed to work out alone first. He sat at the desk in the Highlands Properties study, stone fireplace, morning light off the lock coming through the window, Hedwig asleep on her perch, and wrote out everything he knew. Horcruxes, minimum of 6, based on Voldemort's obsession with the number 7 and his own soul. The diary was 1. Destroyed. The fragment in Harry's scar was 1, which complicated things considerably. That left 4. He had a theory about the snake. Nagini, Voldemort's familiar, mentioned in several texts relating to the Dark Lord's activities before his first fall. A living Horcrux was theoretically possible and theoretically the most dangerous kind, because it moved and thought and could defend itself. He had partial theories about the rest based on Voldemort's psychology, trophies, symbols, objects of prestige. Hogwarts founders' artifacts. He wrote the theories down, drew lines between them, circled the ones he could verify. Then he wrote a separate column headed "The One in My Scar" and looked at it for a long time. Dumbledore's plan, as Harry understood it from 2 years of watching the man operate, was for Harry to die. Not permanently. Dumbledore was not a murderer, Harry was fairly sure, and genuinely believed he'd found a way around the permanent death part. The ancient sacrifice magic that had saved Harry as an infant had created a protective enchantment. If Harry walked willingly toward death, if he let Voldemort kill him, the Horcrux in his scar would die with it, and Harry would survive because of his mother's sacrifice still running through his blood. It was elegant. It was clever. It was the plan of a man who believed that the ends justified the means and that Harry's willingness to sacrifice himself was something that could be engineered through the right combination of love, loyalty, and a carefully managed education in heroism. Harry thought Dumbledore was probably right about the mechanics. He thought Dumbledore was completely wrong about the execution. He wrote a letter to Bonebreaker. He asked a specific question: was it possible to remove a soul fragment from a living host without killing the host, given sufficient magical skill and preparation? He sent it with Hedwig, who departed with the air of someone who'd been waiting to be given something important to do. Bonebreaker's reply came 4 days later: theoretically possible. Practically unprecedented. I would need to examine the fragment directly. Come in. Harry went in the following Tuesday. The diagnostic suite had been updated since his regular sessions had ended, new instruments, the diorite table replaced with something darker and heavier, Copperlock now working at a larger desk with a junior assistant of her own whom Harry didn't recognize. She looked up when he came in and gave him the direct look she'd always given him, the one that was half assessment and half something he'd come to understand was its own kind of warmth, compressed into a look because Copperlock was economical with expression. You grew, she said. It's been 2 years, Harry said. Sit on the table. He sat. Bonebreaker worked without preamble, which Harry appreciated. The examination of the soul fragment took 40 minutes, during which Harry felt the familiar deep-level perception of being looked at beneath his surface, the mapping instruments doing their quiet work while Bonebreaker's face went through a series of careful expressions that someone less experienced in reading him would have called neutral. When Bonebreaker finally lowered his hands and stood back, he looked at Harry with the expression of a man who has found exactly what he expected and wishes he hadn't. It's stable, Bonebreaker said. It's been stable since you were an infant. It does not grow, it does not feed, it does not communicate with the external world. He paused. It has, however, been influenced by the magical development around it. Your core's expansion over the past 7 years has, not absorbed it exactly, but encapsulated it. Surrounded it. Can you remove it? Harry asked. Yes, Bonebreaker said, which Harry had not expected, and the room felt different afterward in the way that single affirmatives can change the quality of air. It will be the most complex extraction I have ever attempted. It will take significant preparation. And the timing will need to be precise. If Voldemort is actively connected to his other Horcruxes when we extract this fragment, there is a possibility of rebound. He's not in a body currently, Harry said. He has been getting closer to one, Bonebreaker said. Every year. He is anchored to the living world through his remaining Horcruxes. He held Harry's gaze. If you bring me the other Horcruxes, I can destroy them simultaneously with the extraction. It removes the rebound risk. Harry was quiet for a moment. All of them at once. All of them at once, Bonebreaker confirmed. One coordinated action. Harry turned this over. The scale of it. Finding, acquiring, and delivering multiple Horcruxes while also managing third year at Hogwarts, the ongoing Gringotts legal action, Sirius Black's inquiry, and Dumbledore's increasing awareness that the chess pieces were not where he'd placed them. How long do you need to prepare? Harry asked. A year, Bonebreaker said. Minimum. I have 2 before Voldemort regains a body, Harry said. He'd worked out the timeline from the diary's activation, the rate of Quirrell's possession, and what he knew about the Triwizard Tournament. The tournament is the mechanism he'll use. Someone will ensure Harry Potter's name goes into the goblet. The tournament provides a way to get me into a graveyard. Bonebreaker looked at him. You know about the tournament? Dumbledore announced it last spring to the staff. McGonagall told me. He paused. She's been useful. 1 year, Bonebreaker said. Find me the Horcruxes. Harry nodded. He hopped off the table and turned to find Ragnok standing in the doorway, which was slightly startling because Ragnok moved with a specific deliberate quality and Harry was usually better at tracking it. How long have you been there? Harry asked. Long enough, Ragnok said, which wasn't an answer. He came into the room and set a folder on the side table and looked at Harry with the expression that had evolved over 8 years from pure assessment into something that still functioned as assessment but had other things layered under it. Sit down. There are developments. Harry sat. Ragnok sat across from him, which was unusual enough that Harry felt the significance of it before Ragnok said a word. 3 things, Ragnok said. First, the DMLE inquiry into Sirius Black has produced a finding. Insufficient evidence for the original conviction. The inquiry recommends a formal trial. He let this land. Second, we have a complete audit of the Malfoy Vault's post-1981 acquisitions. Among the items, 4 objects of significance that match the profile of Voldemort-associated artifacts. The audit has been submitted to the Wisengamot's Artifact Review Committee, which Dumbledore does not chair. Harry felt something steady and warm move through him. And the third thing? Ragnok opened the folder. The legal file on the soul bindings and the channeling network is complete. He placed it on the table between them. 143 pages. Evidence dating to 1981. Witness statements from Bonebreaker, Copperlock, myself, and 4 independent curse-breaking specialists who reviewed the documentation. The channeling records. The vault transactions. The guardian designation and its illegal extended use. He closed the folder. It is ready. Harry looked at the folder. 6 years of work. Of twice-weekly visits and contracts read by lamplight and bindings removed one by one and lessons in magic theory and gobbledygook and legal infrastructure. 6 years of Ragnok saying not yet and when the time is right and documentation is the only weapon that cannot be deflected. When do we file? Harry asked. When you decide, Ragnok said. The filing goes to the Wisengamot through the Goblin legal channel. It bypasses Dumbledore's chairmanship because it involves a complaint against the chair. The International Confederation of Wizards has a review board for exactly this situation. He held Harry's gaze. Once filed, it cannot be unfiled. It goes public. The press will have it within 24 hours of the Confederation receiving it. What does Dumbledore do when he finds out? Harry asked. He will attempt to discredit it, Ragnok said. He will argue the bindings were protective, placed for your safety, that the channeling was an unintended consequence of the protective magic. He will be extraordinarily persuasive. He paused. Our documentation removes every legitimate basis for that argument. But persuasion does not always require legitimacy. He'll have supporters, Harry said. He has many supporters. He also has enemies who have been waiting decades for exactly this kind of lever. Ragnok held his gaze steadily. You will need to speak publicly. The documentation is irrefutable, but the human element, you, telling people what was done to you, will determine whether the public accepts the irrefutable evidence or finds reasons to disbelieve it. Harry thought about this. About standing in front of people and talking about himself. About the performance of victimhood, which was a performance he'd always refused. He thought about how to do it honestly, not as a wounded child, not as an angry one, but as someone presenting facts. I can do that, he said. I know, Ragnok said. I'm telling you because it will be hard in a different way than the other hard things have been. He looked at Harry with the expression that was underneath assessment. You have been very controlled for a long time. The public element will require you to let people see something real. Not performance. Not strategy. A beat. Are you ready for that? Harry was quiet for a moment. When did you start caring about my emotional state? I have always cared about your emotional state, Ragnok said, with the complete composure of a goblin who was not embarrassed to say something true. I was simply confident you could handle it. You still can. He paused. This is different. This is the part where you stop managing everything from behind a wall and let the world see who you actually are. Harry looked at the folder. He thought about the vial, still in his room at the Highlands property, still warm, the light inside it fiercer than ever. Not yet, he said. I need the Horcruxes first. Voldemort neutralized. Then the filing. I'm not going to have Dumbledore exposed and Voldemort still active, that just creates chaos without resolution. Agreed, Ragnok said. I need 1 more year, Harry said. Maybe 2. Ragnok looked at him steadily. We have been patient for 8 years, Harry. We can manage 2 more. 3rd year came with Dementors at the station, which Harry experienced differently from every other student on the train. When the Dementor opened the compartment door, Harry felt it, the cold, the despair, the specific soul-sucking darkness of it, and then felt something else entirely, his own core responding to it the way an immune system responds to an invader, with the automatic surety of something that recognized the threat and had already decided what to do about it. He raised his wand and produced a Patronus. Not a silvery wisp. A full corporeal Patronus, solid and luminous, that filled the compartment with light that the Dementor retreated from immediately. The form of it was a stag, his father's animagus form, which Harry hadn't consciously chosen. It had simply arrived, as if the magic knew things about inheritance that Harry was still learning. The compartment went silent. Hermione stared at the stag. Ron stared at the stag. Neville, who was with them, sat completely still with an expression that was awe and something more personal, something about his own parents who'd been destroyed by different darkness but darkness nonetheless. The pale man in the corner, new defense teacher, sleeping until the Dementor had arrived, shabby robes, and the look of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time, had started awake at the Dementor's entrance and watched the whole thing. He looked at Harry's Patronus with an expression Harry couldn't entirely read from this angle. Something that mixed surprise with recognition. Remarkable, he said softly. Professor Lupin. Harry said, because he'd read the staff list before term. The man blinked. You know me? I knew my parents, Harry said. Ragnok has the Gringotts files. You're listed as one of my father's closest friends. He paused. Also my godfathers. Lupin went very still. The stag dissolved. The compartment was just a compartment again, cold but normal, the train moving through dark countryside. Sirius Black, Lupin said. Is getting a trial, Harry said. The DMLE found insufficient evidence for the original conviction. There's a formal inquiry. He watched Lupin's face. You knew him. You know what happened. How do you know about, I told you. I read a lot. He held Lupin's gaze. I'd like to hear your version of events, when you're ready. I've got the documents, but documents don't tell me what he was like. He paused. What my parents were like. Something moved through Lupin's face that had the quality of a man who'd been surviving on minimum and had just been offered something he'd been hungry for without knowing how hungry he was. I'd like that too, Lupin said. Lupin was a revelation. Not as a teacher, though he was the best defense teacher Harry had encountered by a distance that wasn't close. Quirrell had been a performance of incompetence, and Harry's second year's Lockhart had been an experience that Harry had navigated by learning defense through independent study while Lockhart taught the art of narcissistic autobiography. Lupin was genuinely skilled and genuinely present in the specific way of someone who loved what they taught and taught like it mattered. But the revelation was personal. They developed a habit of talking after class, not the formal office hour arrangement, but simply, when the other students left, Lupin would be putting away equipment and Harry would be lingering, and something would get said, and the conversation would run for 20 minutes before either of them noticed. He talked about James Potter like someone telling beloved stories that hadn't been told in years, carefully at first and then with the ease of someone who'd been alone with them too long. He talked about Lily with a different quality, more deliberate, more precise, the way you describe someone whose intelligence you respected more than you could fully express. She saw everything, Lupin said once, dismantling a Boggart cabinet after class while Harry sat on a desk. Before it happened. Before anyone else had worked it out. She'd look at a situation and just, no. Not obviously. She never made you feel stupid about it. He paused. You have that. People keep telling me I'm like her, Harry said. Is that strange? Harry considered it. I didn't know her, he said. So I can't confirm or deny. But if she was someone who read everything and planned carefully and refused to be managed by people who thought they knew better, he paused. Then yes. Probably. Lupin smiled. It was an old smile, used and worn smooth. She would have been furious, he said quietly. About the bindings. About the cupboard. His voice had something in it that was controlled carefully. About all of it. Harry looked at him. Ragnok told you. He wrote to me in August, Lupin said. He said you'd asked him to share the documentation with people who had a right to know. He met Harry's eyes. Did you ask him to? I asked him to share it with people who cared about my parents specifically, Harry said. You qualified. Lupin was quiet for a moment. I should have come for you, he said. When Sirius was taken. I should have come and made sure you were, he stopped. You were grieving, Harry said. And ill. And alone. He kept his voice even, not unkind. I don't hold it against you. I'm saying this so you understand that I'm not holding it against you, because I think you've been holding it against yourself. Lupin looked at him with the expression of a man being offered something by someone who shouldn't have the angle to offer it. You're 12, he said. Almost 13, Harry said. The Boggart lesson happened on a Thursday and was magnificent for everyone except in the specific way that it revealed something Harry had been thinking about. When students faced the Boggart, they saw spiders, snakes, failure, an intimidating teacher. Standard fears, the fears of people living ordinary lives with ordinary threats. Harry stepped forward and the Boggart looked at him and paused in a way that Boggarts didn't usually pause, as if it were running through its options and finding them insufficient. Then it became Dumbledore. Not Dumbledore as threat, not as monster. Dumbledore as Harry had first seen him in the Great Hall, warm-eyed and silver-bearded and looking at Harry with the specific care of someone who believed they were doing the right thing, and the horror of it was not that it was frightening but that it was the truest thing in the room, the fear of a world where Dumbledore's kindness was real and his methods were still wrong, where the man who stole from you smiled while he did it and believed every word of the justification. Harry raised his wand and thought of Ragnok handing him a contract at age 5 and saying we will teach you, and the boggart Dumbledore dissolved into something ridiculous and the class laughed and moved on, and Lupin caught Harry's eye across the room and gave him a small, specific nod that said several things without words. The Marauders map was found in November, which was not the discovery Harry had expected but which was extraordinary. Filch's cabinet, confiscated items, 2 years of Hermione quietly documenting what was in there as a side project, and the map turned up in a box that turned out to belong to a deceased student who'd left it behind, or so the label said, and Harry touched it and felt old Marauder signature magic on it, his father's, bright and quick, and a warmth he recognized as serious even from a decade-old impression, and Lupin's, layered and patient, and said I solemnly swear that I am up to no good in a tone of complete sincerity. The map opened. Hermione made a sound that was half gasp and half the noise she made when she finished a particularly satisfying piece of research. Harry looked at the map of the entire castle and all its occupants rendered in moving ink, and then looked at something specific, the name Peter Pettigrew, moving in a dormitory that should have contained only Gryffindor third-year boys, inside the dot labeled Ron Weasley. Ron, Harry said. Yeah. Where's Scabbers? Ron looked up from his essay with the expression of someone who had grown accustomed to Harry's non-sequiturs being relevant. In my pocket, why? Because according to this map, Harry said, keeping his voice calm and level and giving Ron the respect of full eye contact, the rat in your pocket is Peter Pettigrew. The silence in the common room was total. Harry told Lupin the following morning. Privately, before class, laying the map on the desk between them and pointing to the dot with Pettigrew's name and watching Lupin's face go through the full journey of a man who has believed something for 12 years and is watching the foundation crack. Lupin's hands were shaking when he sat down. How long have you known? Lupin asked. Since yesterday, Harry said. I've had theories about the secret keeper situation since I was 9 and understood the Fidelius charm, but I didn't have this piece. He paused. He's been living in the Weasley household for 12 years. Sirius has been in Azkaban for 12 years, Lupin said, with the voice of someone doing arithmetic that keeps coming out the same terrible total. Yes, Harry said. I need you to be careful about what we do next. The trial inquiry is in progress. If Pettigrew disappears before the trial, the case loses its key evidence. He held Lupin's gaze. I need him intact, at the ministry, giving testimony. Can you help me make sure that happens? Lupin looked at the map. You're asking me to wait. I'm asking you to do this correctly, Harry said. Not in a hallway. Not in a moment of, he paused, choosing words carefully. I know what 12 years does to people. I know what this feels like. But if we do this wrong, Pettigrew escapes and Sirius stays in Azkaban, and the evidence goes with him. He paused. You know Sirius. What would he want? Lupin took a breath that came from somewhere deep. He'd want to handle it himself, he said. But if he couldn't, he stopped. He'd want it done right. Then help me do it right. They handled it in March, on a full moon, which was terrible timing that couldn't be avoided because Pettigrew had sensed the danger and was days from fleeing and Harry had run out of waiting room. The confrontation in the Shrieking Shack was nothing like Harry had expected emotionally and exactly like he'd expected practically. Pettigrew was clever and desperate in the way that trapped people with survival instincts are clever and desperate, and the argument he made for his own life was coherent enough that Ron's face had done something complicated. The 12 years of fond ownership of what he believed was a pet sitting uneasily against the reality of what the pet was. Harry kept Pettigrew contained, not with force but with the specific certainty of someone who knew what was going to happen and had no uncertainty for him to exploit, and sent a Patronus to McGonagall with a message attached, the way Lupin had taught him, and waited for the ministry representatives who arrived 22 minutes later. Pettigrew went to ministry custody. Sirius sat in the corner of the Shrieking Shack with Lupin beside him and looked at Harry with the gaunt, hollowed face of a man who had been in Azkaban for 12 years and was not yet sure whether what was happening was real, and Harry sat down across from him on the dusty floor and said, "Hi. I'm Harry." Sirius let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. "I know who you are," he said, in a voice that had been sandpapered down to something rough and essential. "You look exactly like James. Except for your eyes." "So I've heard," Harry said. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. "They told me you were living with Petunia," he said. Something in his voice when he said her name had the quality of an old judgment being confirmed. "Are you?" "I'm fine," Harry said. "I've been fine for a long time." He paused. "I need you to be fine too. Your trial is in 4 months. The documentation is strong. I need you to hold on for 4 months. You've been working on my case," Sirius said, slowly, as if reassembling what this meant. "A 13-year-old has been working on my case." 12 when I started," Harry said. 13 now. Sirius looked at him for another long moment and then at Lupin and then back at Harry, and something in his face settled, not relief yet, not all the way, but the first edge of it, the beginning of allowing the door of possibility to open. "James would be so bloody proud of you," he said quietly, which was not something Harry had ever been told before and which landed somewhere in his chest with a warmth that had nothing to do with his magical core. "You can tell me more about that," Harry said, "after the trial." Sirius, despite everything, smiled. 4th year started in August with the Quidditch World Cup, which Harry attended as the guest of the Weasleys. Sirius's trial was in September. The Horcrux plan was moving at Bonebreaker's pace, and Ragnok had suggested Harry do something that looked like a normal summer, which the World Cup qualified as. The Death Eater demonstration after the match was the first time Harry had seen Voldemort's network operating publicly since the diary, and it had a different texture here, not one possessed man acting in secret but an organized group, still underground but showing its face, testing whether the world had relaxed enough to push against. Harry watched from a distance and catalogued faces and felt, distantly, Voldemort's presence like a cold compass needle pointing southeast. Getting stronger. Getting closer to substantial. The Triwizard Tournament was announced at the beginning of term, and Harry looked at Dumbledore announcing it and understood the architecture of it completely now. The age restriction would be circumvented, Harry's name would be entered by someone acting on Voldemort's behalf, and the tournament's magical contract would compel Harry to participate. The portkey in the final task would take him to a graveyard. Blood ritual. Voldemort regains a body. He knew who the agent was going to be. Mad-Eye Moody, arriving as defense teacher with exactly the timing that required, was not Mad-Eye Moody. The magical signature was wrong, off by a specific margin that Harry had learned to detect by 2 years of Ragnok's paranoia and Bonebreaker's scanning techniques. Real Moody's signature would have been aged and battle-hardened. This one was a layer over something younger and hungrier. Polyjuice. Almost certainly. Barty Crouch Jr., based on Ragnok's intelligence on Voldemort's remaining active supporters who'd escaped Azkaban. Harry let it run. He let his name come out of the goblet on Halloween evening and stood in front of the whole school with the correct expression of someone who was moderately surprised and not particularly pleased, and said, "Yes, I'll compete," and went back to his seat and told Ron and Hermione quietly what he actually knew, which was everything. "We're going to let you walk into a graveyard," Ron said. "I'm going to walk into a graveyard knowing exactly what's there," Harry said. "That's different." He looked at both of them. "Everything is ready. Bonebreaker has the preparation done. I've located 4 of the Horcruxes. The 5th will come to me through the tournament, that's the cup itself, or a portkey attached to it. I think Voldemort has made one final Horcrux in the last year, while he's been regaining strength." "The snake. How do you know the cup is a Horcrux?" Hermione asked. "It isn't," Harry said. "But the portkey will take me somewhere Voldemort is. And Voldemort will have Nagini." He paused. "That's where I'll get the last Horcrux." "You're going to take a snake off Voldemort," Ron said. "I'm going to separate Nagini from Voldemort at the right moment," Harry said. Yes. A long pause. Okay, Ron said. What do we need to do? The tournament tasks were a nuisance in the logistical sense of things that consumed time Harry would have preferred to spend on more pressing matters. He handled the dragon in the first task not with the flying broom strategy that every spectator expected but by simply walking toward it with his wand out and speaking to it, not in Parseltongue, dragons weren't snakes, but with the specific calm of someone whose magical output made the dragon's threat assessment recalibrate. The Hungarian horntail had stared at him for 15 seconds and then stepped back from the egg, which had caused the crowd to make a sound that Harry had found mildly embarrassing. He overheard Dumbledore afterward telling McGonagall that Harry's performance was extraordinary but concerning, and filed the concerning for later. The lake task in February was more interesting. Underwater, Parseltongue worked as a passive magical communication that extended to all aquatic creatures, which was a fact Harry had found in a footnote in a pre-statute of secrecy text and which meant negotiating the passage with the Mere people was straightforward. He retrieved his thing, Hermione, who had not appreciated being magically induced to breathe underwater and await retrieval, and who accepted his apology with the grace of someone choosing not to hold a grudge but maintaining the right to reference it later, and brought her to the surface in excellent time with the other champions people floating alongside because Harry had refused to leave them. The judges discussed this for a long time. Dumbledore's expression when Harry surfaced with all 4 hostages was the expression of a man watching a chess piece that was supposed to be a pawn behave like it had always been the queen. The third task was the maze. Harry walked into the maze on a June evening knowing what was at the end of it and what he was going to do when he got there, and walked through it efficiently, not running, not panicking, navigating the obstacles with the clean problem-solving he applied to everything, a blast-ended script redirected here, a confounded path avoided there. Cedric Diggory encountered halfway through and helped to safety with the specific directness of someone who wasn't competing for the trophy but couldn't leave a person in danger. Cedric looked at him afterward, after Harry had redirected him to a safe path, clearly out of the running for reaching the cup first. Why? Cedric asked. Because leaving you there would have been idiotic, Harry said, and kept moving. The cup was at the center, gleaming on its plinth. Harry stood in front of it and felt the portkey enchantment radiating from it and felt, beneath that, the wrongness of Voldemort's magical presence soaked into the metal. Not a Horcrux. Just a summoning device. He'd been right about that. He picked it up. The graveyard arrived around him in a twist of displacement, cold night air, old tombstones, a yew tree against a dark sky. A figure carrying something bundled. Wormtail, unmistakably, his magical signature even smaller and more furtive than it had been in the Shrieking Shack. Kill the spare, said a high cold voice from the bundle. Harry turned and cast a shield so strong it caught the killing curse before it reached him and redirected it into the ground, which detonated a section of turf and sent Wormtail stumbling back into a tombstone with his wand arm useless from the impact. Then Harry stood in the graveyard with the cold night around him and looked at what was in Wormtail's arms, the rudimentary homunculus of a soul without a body, Voldemort between states, with enough awareness and power to speak and direct but not enough substance to act directly. Potter, Voldemort said, from the bundle. The same voice from the chamber. Different resonance now, angrier, with the specific fury of a plan in real time encountering deviation. Hello, Harry said. You will not survive this, Voldemort said. You are a boy with a wand, I know what you are, Harry said, and his voice was completely steady, and the night was cold, and he felt his core burning in his chest like a furnace that had been properly stoked for 8 years. I know about the Horcruxes. I know what you've built and how you've built it, and I know the snake is your last anchor. He paused. I'm not here to fight you. Not tonight. I'm here for Nagini. A silence. Then, Nagini, Voldemort called. The snake came from the darkness between the tombstones, enormous and liquid in her movement, and Harry tracked her with peripheral vision while keeping his attention on the voice from the bundle, which was the more immediate threat. He said, in Parseltongue, stop. Nagini stopped. He will punish you, Harry said to the snake, in the sibilant fluid syllables that cost nothing, if you do not obey him. But he cannot punish you if you are not here. Come to me. The boy who speaks tries to steal my servant, Voldemort said, in Parseltongue, with the fury of someone whose tools were not behaving. Nagini, he made you a piece of himself, Harry said to the snake, not to Voldemort. Does that feel like something you chose? A pause. Nagini moved toward Harry. He didn't touch her. He produced from his robe a containment vial that Bonebreaker had prepared, a modified version of the instruments they'd used in the diagnostic suite, large enough for a snake that could compress its own mass, sealed with runework that would hold a Horcrux. He held it open and felt the soul fragment inside Nagini resist and pull at the edges of the containment, and then, as the snake flowed into the vial with the specific calm of a creature that had made a decision, the fragment came with it. The vial sealed. Harry pocketed it. Interesting, Voldemort said. The fury had subsided to something colder and, Harry thought, more genuine. You have been planning this. For years, Harry said, in English. Then you know what I will do when I have a body, Voldemort said. You know this is not over. I know, Harry said. I know you'll find another way. I know you'll keep coming. He looked at the bundle. But every time you come, you're less than you were before. And I'm exactly what I was always supposed to be. He picked up the portkey. Get a body. Get strong. Then come find me and we'll finish it properly. A pause. I'll be ready. He pressed the cup and went home. The graveyard disappeared. He was back on the Hogwarts grounds, standing in the dark with the cup in one hand and Nagini's veil in the other, and the crowd in the stands was a distant murmur, and overhead the stars were doing exactly what stars did regardless of anything happening beneath them, which Harry had always found inexplicably comforting. He walked toward the lights. Bonebreaker, when Harry arrived at Gringotts the following morning with 4 Horcrux objects and 1 containment vial, said nothing for a long time. He laid them out on the new dark table with the care of a man organizing something irreversible and looked at each one in turn. The ring, he said. The locket. The cup, you brought the Triwizard Cup. Hufflepuff's cup, Harry said. It wasn't the tournament trophy. That was something Crouch portkeyed to look like the trophy. Helga Hufflepuff's cup, Salazar Slytherin's locket, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, and Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, Bonebreaker said, which explained where the diadem had come from. Harry had found it by walking through the room of requirement in March and feeling a wrongness behind a particular pile of junk that hadn't been there the first time he'd used the room. And Nagini, Harry said, tapping the vial. And Nagini. Bonebreaker looked up. That leaves the fragment in your scar. Yes, Harry said. I am ready, Bonebreaker said. If you are. Harry sat on the table. He breathed. He felt the fragment in his scar, stable, encapsulated, a thing that had been there for 13 years and which he'd been carrying for 8 of those years with full knowledge of what it was and what it meant. He felt it as separate from himself, clearly separate, the way you can feel a pebble in a shoe, uncomfortable, present, not you. Yes, he said. Ragnok came in without being summoned, which suggested he'd been waiting outside, which was the most Ragnok thing Harry could imagine. He stood at the monitoring station with both hands on the instruments, and Copperlock was at the containment station, and the junior assistant had been sent out, and it was just the 4 of them, the same configuration it had always been at the hardest moments. Bonebreaker placed his hands. All at once, he said. The simultaneous destruction and extraction. When I say begin. The 5 Horcruxes on the table began to glow, the specific wrong-colored light of soul fragments recognizing their own kind through proximity, the magical equivalent of a resonance frequency. The containment instruments Copperlock managed flared in response. Harry closed his eyes. Begin, Bonebreaker said. What happened next lasted 40 seconds. It felt like being turned inside out and then right side in again, and the fragment in his scar blazed white and then screamed, soundlessly, through the bone and tissue of his skull, and Harry felt it resist and he held himself absolutely still and let it resist and then felt Bonebreaker's practiced certainty reach into the space between the fragment and his own magic and pull, And the fragment came out of his scar, and the scar blazed so intensely he thought he would pass out and then didn't. On the table, the 5 horcruxes destroyed simultaneously. The fragment from his scar, caught by Bonebreaker's containment charm, dissolved. The room went quiet. Harry sat on the table with his eyes open and felt his own head. The scar was still there. It always would be. But the wrongness behind it, the cold compass needle pointing toward Voldemort, the accumulated weight of someone else's presence in the back of his mind, was gone. Had been so constant for 13 years that he hadn't fully understood what it was until it was absent. The absence had its own quality, clean, like an open window. Like the first morning after a long illness when you realize the fever has broken. Done, Bonebreaker said. Done, Harry said. He looked at Ragnok. Ragnok looked at the monitoring instruments, which were doing something extraordinary. The readings were off every scale, the instruments clearly not calibrated for a magical core operating at full capacity without any constraint or fragment or binding, and several of them had simply stopped because they didn't know what to do with the input. Well, Ragnok said. Harry raised his eyebrows. Well, Ragnok said again, and set down his instruments, and looked at Harry with the expression that was underneath everything else, the one that had been building for 8 years, and said, "Now we file." Chapter 6, The Unbinding complete. The filing happened on a Monday. Ragnok submitted the legal brief to the International Confederation of Wizards through the Goblin diplomatic channel at 9 in the morning, which meant it arrived with the full weight of Gringotts' institutional authority behind it and bypassed every checkpoint that Dumbledore controlled in the British wizarding system. The courier was a senior Goblin diplomat named Ironforge who had been waiting for this specific assignment for 3 years and who carried the folder the way soldiers carry flags, not reverently, but with the precision of someone who understood what it represented. Harry was in the Highlands property when it happened. He'd come up the night before, telling nobody except McGonagall where he was going, and had sat up until 2 in the morning watching the lock in the dark. Not anxious. Not rehearsing. Just being in the place that had been his for 3 years, the first space that had ever been entirely his, and letting the night be quiet around him. He'd written 4 letters before he slept. One to Sirius, whose trial had concluded in October with a full acquittal and who was currently living in a muggle flat in Edinburgh because Grimmauld Place wasn't habitable and the healers at St. Mungo's had said he needed to be somewhere with windows and noise and the presence of people who were alive and not screaming. The letter said, "It's happening today. I thought you should know first." One to Lupin, who was teaching part-time at a small wizarding school in Scotland and writing a defense textbook that Harry had contributed 3 chapters of notes to, which Lupin had accepted with the gracious surprise of someone who kept being astonished by the depth of a person he'd watched grow up from a distance. The letter said the same thing. One to Neville, who deserved to know because he'd been carrying the weight of being almost the chosen one for 14 years and the filing would change the public landscape of that story. The letter said, "You are exactly who you should be. None of this changes that." One to Hermione and Ron, jointly, which said, "It's today. I'll be at the school by evening. Save me dinner." Then he'd slept 8 hours, which was something he'd gotten better at since the Horcruxes were gone, the absence of that cold splinter in his skull producing a quality of rest he hadn't had before. He ate breakfast watching the lock catch the morning light and felt the filing happen, not magically but in the way that someone who has been preparing for a specific moment for years feels it arrive, the distinct sense of a threshold crossing, of something becoming irrevocable. He washed his plate, packed his bag, and took the train south. The first sign that things had moved was at King's Cross, where a wizard he didn't recognize looked at him for 3 seconds too long from behind a newspaper that was right side up but not moving. Harry catalogued it and walked past. The second sign was Hedwig, waiting at the Hogsmeade Owl post office where he'd arranged for her to receive correspondence, who had 4 letters for him and the expression of someone who'd had a busy morning. He read them on the walk up to the school. The first was from Ragnok, confirmed receipt. International Confederation has issued a formal acknowledgement. They will convene a review panel within 72 hours. Expect noise by tomorrow morning. The second was from McGonagall, I have read the full filing. I will be in my office when you arrive. Come directly. The third was from the Daily Prophet, which had somehow gotten hold of him already, requesting a comment. He folded it and put it in his bag. The fourth was from Dumbledore. He opened it last because he wanted to read it with the castle in view, wanted to be back on the ground of the place where everything had started and where it was going to end before he read what it said. The handwriting was neat and old-fashioned, the strokes of it measured and deliberate. It read, "Harry, I believe we should speak before this proceeds further. I ask only for the opportunity to explain what was done and why. I think, if you truly understand the full picture, you may see that what appeared to be harm was intended as protection. My door is always open." Harry folded it with the same careful precision he'd folded everything Dumbledore had ever given him and put it in his inside pocket and walked through the school gates. McGonagall's office was exactly as it always was, the tartan tin of biscuits on the desk that she offered on serious occasions and didn't bother with on minor ones, the fire going, the portraits pretending to sleep with greater effort than usual, which told Harry they'd been awake and listening for a while. She was standing at the window when he came in, not sitting, which was another tell. She turned when the door closed. "Sit down," she said, which was not how she usually started conversations, and then didn't take her own advice, standing with her arms folded and looking at him with the expression she'd been developing since the night of the chamber, the one that had kept evolving, kept acquiring new layers as she learned more, and which was now doing something complex enough that Harry didn't try to name all its components. "You should have told me sooner," she said. "We've had this conversation," Harry said. "We're having it again," she said, and there was something in her voice that was not anger but was adjacent to it, the emotion of a person who has been reviewing their own history and finding it wanting. "I have been in this school for 37 years. I have watched Albus make decisions and trusted them, and there were things," she stopped. Started again. "There were things I saw and chose not to ask about. The way he talked about you. The way he managed what information you received. The way every situation seemed to arrange itself so that you'd end up," she stopped again. "I should have asked." "Yes," Harry said. "But you asked when I gave you the letter. That counts." "Does it?" Harry looked at her steadily. "Professor. You walked through purple flames with your wand out and checked whether I was hurt before you asked me a single question. That counts." He paused. "You've spent 2 years sitting with the knowledge of what was done to me and you haven't told Dumbledore anything I told you in confidence. That counts considerably." She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face settled. "I told him this morning," she said. "Before you arrived. I went to his office and I told him I was aware of the filing and that I supported it." She paused. "I thought you should know." Harry looked at her. "How did he respond?" "He was very calm," she said. "He said he hoped there would be an opportunity for full context to be provided." Her voice had a quality of precise, contained anger. "He said he hoped I hadn't been misled." "What did you say?" "I said that the documentation from Gringotts was 143 pages and that I had read all of it." She held his gaze. "And then I left." Harry nodded. "What happens now?" she asked. "The Confederation convenes," Harry said. "The evidence is irrefutable. Ragnok spent 6 years making it irrefutable. Dumbledore will respond. He's going to argue protective intent, extenuating circumstances, the wartime context. He's very good at it." He paused. "I'm going to make a public statement." She went still. "When?" "The Confederation Review Panel convenes in 72 hours. I'll speak before that. Tomorrow, if I can arrange it." "The Daily Prophet, not the Prophet," Harry said. "They'll spin it wrong regardless of what I say. I've drafted a written statement that's going to Ragnok today for legal review, and then it goes to 12 publications simultaneously, including the Quibbler, which is the only publication in Britain whose editor I trust not to take Dumbledore's call before printing." McGonagall blinked. "You've drafted a statement." "Last week." He paused. "I've been drafting it for about 2 years, actually. The current version is the 14th. A moment of silence. "You are a very unusual young man, Mr. Potter," she said, which was the closest she'd come to saying the thing she'd been working up to for 2 years, and Harry accepted it with the quiet dignity of someone who knew what it meant from her specifically. "Will you sit with Neville when it comes out?" Harry asked. "His name is in the documentation, the prophecy context, the alternative subject, the reason Voldemort chose my family over his. He shouldn't be alone when the public starts processing that." McGonagall's expression did something swift and real. "Of course," she said. Harry nodded, picked up his bag, and went to find his friends. Ron and Hermione had saved him dinner, as requested, and were sitting in their usual corner of the Gryffindor common room when he came through the portrait hole, looking like two people who had been waiting for someone and spending the wait in productive worry. Hermione had parchment and had clearly been making notes. Ron had a chess set and had clearly been using it as something to do with his hands. Harry sat down, accepted the plate Hermione had charmed warm, and ate. They waited until he'd eaten, which he appreciated. They'd learned this, that there were types of conversations that didn't happen properly when someone was hungry, and Harry was frequently hungry after days of being somewhere alone and thinking hard. "It's done," Ron said. "Not a question." "Filed this morning," Harry said. "The Confederation has it. The documentation is in 17 languages because Ragnok thinks in 17 languages." He looked at Ron. Sirius knows. He's been told. Ron absorbed this. "How is he?" "Getting better," Harry said, which was true and careful. Sirius at 6 months post-Azkaban was not yet the man he'd presumably been before 12 years of Dementors, but was becoming more real by increments, filling in at the edges. "He wants to meet you all properly. Not in a shack." Ron grinned at that, brief and real. "The statement goes out tomorrow," Harry told Hermione. "I need you to read it tonight. Not to correct the legal language, Ragnok's handling that, but I need to know if it sounds like me." Hermione took the parchment he produced with both hands. She read it with the focused speed she brought to everything important, her eyes moving with the specific quality of someone reading for subtext and structure simultaneously. When she finished, she held it for a moment without speaking. "It sounds exactly like you," she said. "It's very calm." "Should it be angrier?" Harry asked. "No," she said. "It shouldn't. Angry would let them make it about your emotional state rather than the facts." She looked at him over the parchment. "This is better. It reads like someone who is completely certain, which is more frightening to the people on the wrong side of it than anger would be." "Good," Harry said. "There's one part," she said, and handed it back with one paragraph marked. "This bit. You say the bindings were illegal. You say the channeling was theft. But you don't say how it made you feel." She held his gaze. "I know that's deliberate. I know you don't want it to be about that." A pause. But one sentence. Not self-pity, just acknowledgement that it was a childhood. That it was years. People need to connect to that or they'll process it as abstract, and when Dumbledore gives them his version, the abstract version will be easier to rewrite. Harry looked at the paragraph. He was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Ron was pretending to look at the chess pieces and nod at Harry. "One sentence," Harry said. "One honest one," Hermione said. He took the quill she offered and wrote, in the margin, in his own hand, "I was 5 years old the first time I understood that something had been taken from me, and I spent 6 years with the people who found it relearning what it was." He looked at it. He handed it back to Hermione. She read it. Her eyes did something brief and controlled. "Yes," she said. "That." Harry sent the final statement to Ragnok at midnight with Hedwig, who departed with the gravity of someone on an important mission. He went to bed and slept. The statement ran in the morning. "Not the prophet, which ran a confused front-page piece citing unnamed ministry sources and managing to be ambiguous in a way that suggested someone had called someone before dawn. Not the Confederation's official communication, which was formal and measured. In the Quibbler, in full, with Harry's name and a reproduction of the Gringotts seal and 3 paragraphs of context from Ragnok and then the statement itself, 2 pages, 14 drafts distilled into the clearest possible account of what had been done, what had been found, what had been removed, and what it meant. And the one sentence, in the 15th paragraph, exactly as written in the margin. Harry read the published copy over breakfast in the Great Hall, which was doing a specific kind of silence, the silence of 500 people all reading the same thing. The Quibbler had distributed overnight, someone had clearly placed a bulk order because there were copies on every table. He ate his eggs. Across the hall, the staff table was doing its own version of the silence. Flitwick had gone very still with his copy held in both hands. Sprout was reading with the specific expression of someone whose opinion of what they're reading is not complicated. Snape was not reading, his copy was face down on the table and he was staring at his coffee with the look of a man calculating. Dumbledore was not at the table. McGonagall was. She caught Harry's eye across the hall and gave him a nod that was precise, small, and completely legible. Neville was 2 seats down from Harry, and Harry had been watching him peripheral vision since the Morning Post had arrived. He'd read the statement once, put it down, and picked it up again. His face was doing the quiet internal work that Neville's face did when he was processing something large, the working through of implications that he managed internally rather than externally, which was one of the things Harry had always respected about him. Harry moved down 2 seats. "All right?" Harry asked. "The prophecy bit," Neville said quietly. "I know. I'd always known, kind of. But seeing it in print," he stopped. Looked at the paper. "You didn't have to put that in." "I wasn't going to sanitize it," Harry said. "The full context matters." He paused. "You're not diminished by it, Neville. The prophecy going to me instead of you doesn't make you less. It makes you someone who got to be himself without being conscripted into a war." He looked at his friend. "I've always thought you got the better end of that deal." Neville looked at him. "I became who I am because I chose it," Harry said. "Not because a prophecy pointed at me. I want that to be clear." Neville was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your statement says that." Very clearly. Something settled in his face, the completion of a process he'd been working through for a long time. "Thank you." Harry nodded and went back to his eggs. The Confederation panel convened in Geneva on Wednesday. Harry traveled by Portkey with Ragnok and Griphook and McGonagall, who had requested to attend as a character witness and whom Harry had said yes to immediately. Sirius met them there, arriving from Edinburgh with Lupin beside him, looking sharper than he had in October, the eyes clearer, the posture more like someone who decided to be present, and when he saw Harry across the marble lobby of the Confederation building, he walked straight to him and pulled him into a hug that was brief and fierce and said everything he hadn't yet worked out how to say in words. Harry returned it without embarrassment. "You ready?" Sirius asked. "Yes," Harry said. "Of course you are," Sirius said, with the particular blend of pride and affectionate exasperation that Harry had been accumulating from him in small doses for 6 months and which felt like what family was probably supposed to feel like. "You've been ready for this since you were 5, haven't you?" "Since I was 6, technically," Harry said. "At 5 I was still doing foundational reading." Sirius laughed. An actual full laugh, the kind that still surprised him when it came out, like a muscle remembering it existed. The panel chamber was large and neutral in the way that official spaces try to be, which mostly meant the decor had no personality but the magic in the walls was old and serious. 7 members of the International Confederation's review board sat behind a long curved table, ranging in nationality and appearance from an elderly Japanese who'd been in the role for 40 years to a young West African wizard who was clearly new and trying not to look new. In the gallery, observers, diplomats, journalists who'd been credentialed, several ministry officials from 6 countries. In the gallery, too, Hermione and Ron, who had gotten there by a method Harry hadn't asked about and respected the initiative of. Dumbledore arrived with counsel, two wizards in formal robes who had the look of people who charged by the hour and were very good at it. He looked exactly as he always looked, composed, warm, the long silver beard and the half-moon spectacles and the robes that somehow managed to be simultaneously extraordinary and non-threatening. He looked at Harry across the chamber with an expression that was genuine and complicated and impossible to dismiss. Harry looked back. Nothing on his face. Ragnok presented the documentation first. He did it with the efficiency of someone who had organized the most important legal argument of his career and was aware of that and refused to be humble about it. 143 pages of evidence delivered in a 40-minute presentation that had the quality of being simultaneously overwhelming and perfectly clear, the documentation organized so that even someone who wanted to doubt it could only doubt one piece at a time while the rest of it stood. The panel listened with the specific attention of people who were taking this seriously. The Japanese witch asked 3 questions that were excellent. The young West African wizard asked one that revealed he'd read everything already. Dumbledore's counsel objected twice on procedural grounds that were swiftly overruled because the procedural grounds were technical and the tribunal chair was not interested in technical stalling. Then Harry spoke. He stood at the speaking position, stone floor, old magic in the walls, 7 faces watching him, gallery quiet, and held his notes once and then put them down because he didn't need them. He spoke for 20 minutes. He said what happened plainly, the way he described things plainly his entire life, with the clarity of someone who'd thought about this more than anyone could know. He described Gringotts at 5. The instrument going wrong. Ragnok's assessment look. He described Bonebreaker mapping 112 bindings and the specific texture of understanding, at 5 years old, that something had been taken. He described the 6 years of removal, the way each binding came out like a splinter from a place he hadn't known was wounded, the way the world got sharper and clearer and more fully his with each session. He described the channeling network, and what it meant that his magic had been funding an organization he hadn't known existed. He described the cupboard. Not dramatically. Just factually. He said, the cupboard under the stairs, 5 by 3 feet, a camp mattress, Dudley's old clothes, and a family that had been selected by the person who placed the bindings for their specific ability to raise him without asking questions. He said it in the same voice he said everything, level, clear, unhurried, and heard the gallery change quality behind him the way air changes quality when something real enters the room. He said the sentence from the statement. I was 5 years old the first time I understood that something had been taken from me, and I spent 6 years with the people who found it relearning what it was. He paused. I am not standing here asking this panel to punish anyone, he said. I'm standing here because what was done to me was illegal, documented, and irrefutable, and the person who did it was doing it to a child for reasons that may have felt necessary to him but were never consented to, never disclosed, and never his right to impose. He looked at the panel steadily. The question isn't whether Albus Dumbledore intended good things. The question is whether intending good things gives you the right to steal a child's magic, and I think everyone in this room knows the answer to that. He picked up his notes and sat down. Ragnok, beside him, was very still. Dumbledore was given the floor. He rose with the full weight of who he was, the supreme mugwump, the chief warlock, the greatest wizard of the age, a man who had fought darkness for 60 years and paid enormous personal cost for it, and he spoke. And Harry had been right, he was extraordinary at this. He acknowledged the bindings. He acknowledged the channeling. He described the war context, the threat of Voldemort's return, the prophecy and its implications, the impossible choices of a wartime leader. He described the protections on the Dursleys' house. He described the plan he'd built, not hiding it, presenting it as the work of a man who had calculated the least terrible option and taken it. He said, I made choices I cannot defend as just. I can only defend them as necessary. He said it with the honesty of a man who'd been carrying something for 13 years and was setting it down. What I did to Harry was wrong. I believe the wrongness was outweighed by the necessity, and I expect he disagrees. He looked across the chamber at Harry. I expect he has earned the right to disagree. The gallery was very quiet. Harry did not respond to the look, and did not perform anger, and did not perform forgiveness. He looked at the panel and waited. Dumbledore sat down. His counsel attempted a mitigation argument that ran for 11 minutes. The panel asked 22 questions. Ragnok answered 14 of them with additional documentation. The session was recessed for deliberation. In the corridor outside, Harry found a bench and sat down and looked at the high stone ceiling and felt the quiet of a building where serious things happened regularly and whose walls had absorbed the seriousness until it was structural. Sirius sat down beside him. They didn't speak for a while. It was a comfortable silence, one they'd been developing for 6 months, the particular quality of two people who'd each had years of being alone with things and had learned that companionship didn't always require noise. He meant it, Sirius said eventually. What he said in there? About it being wrong. I know, Harry said. Does that, Sirius stopped. Started differently. Does it matter to you? That he knew it was wrong? Harry thought about this honestly. It matters that he said it in front of 7 Confederation judges and 200 gallery observers, he said. Whether it matters to me personally is a different question. He paused. Ask me in a year. Sirius nodded. He looked at Harry sidelong with the expression he had when he was working up to something. Your mum would have stood up in that chamber and been extremely articulate about her feelings on the matter, he said. In a way that would have been technically professional but also extremely volcanic. I know, Harry said. I've been told. Your dad would have found a way to turn the whole thing into something the Marauders could laugh about for a decade. Harry felt something warm in his chest that was not magic. Tell me one, he said. Sirius looked at him. Then he smiled, the old full smile that had started coming back around month 4, the one that made him look less like a man who'd survived something and more like someone who was actually here. Right, he said. So there was this incident in 5th year involving a divination teacher and a crystal ball and the entire Gryffindor Quidditch team. He was still telling it when McGonagall found them 20 minutes later to say the panel had reconvened. The verdict took 7 minutes to deliver. The panel chair, the Japanese witch, whose name was Fumiko Nakamura and whose 40 years of experience sat on her like good armor, read from a prepared document in the flat careful tone of someone who had written it to be unambiguous. Albus Dumbledore was found in violation of the Magical Beings Protection Charter of 1689, Sections 3, 7, and 14. The Wizarding Inheritance and Bloodline Protection Act of 1793. The International Code on Magical Minors, Articles 1 through 6. The Guardian Designation Laws of both British and International Wizarding Statute. He was stripped of his position as Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, effective immediately. His position as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot was referred to the British Ministry for formal proceeding, with the Confederation's finding entered as evidence and a recommendation of removal. His position as Headmaster of Hogwarts was referred to the Hogwarts Board of Governors. All assets held in the Order of the Phoenix Vault connected to the channeling network were frozen pending restitution proceedings, to be calculated by independent Gringotts assessment of magic equivalent value across 13 years. He was not imprisoned. Harry had not asked for that. The documentation had not been built toward imprisonment, and Harry had told Ragnok this 2 years ago when they discussed possible outcomes. I don't want him in a cell. I want him removed from the positions that gave him the power to do this. I want accountability without martyrdom. If he's in a cell he becomes a symbol and symbols are harder to argue with than facts. Ragnok had said, understood. Dumbledore stood through the reading with the composed stillness of a man who had calculated the worst possible outcome and arrived at this already, and who was deciding, in real time, what manner of person he was going to be now that the calculation had materialized. He looked at Harry once during the reading. Not the warmth, not the management. Just a look. Clean and direct. Harry held it. Dumbledore looked away first. After, in the corridor, one of the ministry officials attempted to speak to Harry, wanting a comment for the formal record. Harry directed him to Ragnok, who handled it with the brisk efficiency of someone who had prepared for this specific interaction and had the answer already written down. Hermione appeared at Harry's shoulder with the particular energy of someone who had information she was ready to deploy. "The Hogwarts governors met last month," she said. "Before today. Someone had already filed with them, McGonagall. The board voted 9-4 to appoint her as acting headmistress pending the formal proceedings." Harry looked at McGonagall, who was standing with Lupin 10 feet away discussing something and who caught his look and raised an eyebrow with the precise upward movement that was her version of acknowledgement. "She filed before today," Harry said. "The week after the chamber," Hermione said. "When she finished reading your letter the first time." She looked at him. "She's been building the governor case for 2 years alongside your case." Harry was quiet for a moment. He walked over to McGonagall. She turned from Lupin and looked at him with the expression that had been evolving for 3 years, the one that was fully formed now, not teacher to student, not the careful maintained professional distance. The expression of someone who had made a choice about what kind of person they were and was living in the consequence of that choice and finding it right. "You filed 2 years ago," Harry said. "Someone had to be doing something official," she said. "You were handling the extra-legal. It seemed appropriate to cover the other column. You didn't tell me. You didn't tell me about the Horcruxes until after the fact," she said, precisely. "We appear to operate on a policy of informing each other about completed work rather than consulting on ongoing projects." She paused. "I believe this is because we both find collaboration more efficient when the other person doesn't worry." Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Congratulations, headmistress." Something shifted in her face that she managed quickly but not quickly enough. "Thank you, Mr. Potter," she said. "Try to give the incoming defense teacher less to worry about than you gave the last 4. He went back to London that evening on the Port Quay, arriving in Diagon Alley in the amber light of a summer evening, the streets doing the specific mix of busy and unhurried that characterizes a Tuesday in a place where people live rather than visit. He walked through it slowly, no particular destination, letting the city be around him. His statement was in the Evening Prophet. The Prophet had decided that running it was better than being the only publication that didn't, which was the calculation Harry had planned for. The headline was uncharacteristically plain: Potter's statement, the bindings, the theft, the full account. No dramatic embellishment. Just the thing itself. He stopped at a cafe and bought a cup of tea and sat at the outside table and watched people read it. Not all of them. Some were clearly reading it having already read it in the morning, the slightly recursive attention of someone going through a thing again looking for new implications. Some were reading it for the first time, and Harry watched the progression across their faces, confusion first, then the assembling of it, then the specific expression of people encountering a truth that required them to revise something they believed. Some of them looked up and saw him. He saw it happen, the blink, the recognition, the beginning of whatever reaction was forming. He gave it nothing to land on. Not coldness. Not performance. He drank his tea and looked at the evening street and let them make of him whatever they made. A woman at the next table, late middle age, reading the Prophet with an expression that had traveled through several stages and arrived at something complicated, said, not to him, to her companion, the way people say things when they forget they're outside. He was 5 years old. "Yes," Harry said. She looked at him sharply. Then at the paper. Then at him again, doing the same recalibration he'd been watching all evening. "Are you?" "Yes," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I voted for him, you know. For Dumbledore. Chief Warlock. Every vote he stood for." "I know," Harry said. "Most people did." "I didn't know, no one did," Harry said. That was rather the point. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry. That's inadequate, but I'm sorry." "Thank you," Harry said, and he meant it, and he watched her process that he meant it and couldn't quite resolve the expectation that he'd be angrier with the reality that he wasn't. He finished his tea and walked. It was evening and the light was gold the way summer light goes gold in London when the day has been good, and Harry walked through it with his hands in his pockets and felt the city around him. He could feel, distantly, the residual wardwork on various buildings, Gringotts, the ministry, a few private addresses where the wards were old and well built. He could feel the ambient hum of the magical population of London, thousands of lives running their small warm magic through the world without thinking about it. He could feel, somewhere south of the river, a cold directional awareness that was faint but present, Voldemort. Somewhere far south. Somewhere without a body still, without the anchors of the Horcruxes, with less purchase on the physical world than he'd had at any point since his first fall. Getting smaller, not larger. Retreating from the ambient world the way a flame retreats when you remove the wood. Not gone. But smaller. Harry noted it and walked on. He sent Ragnok a letter from the Hogsmeade post office when he was back in school, short and precise, Horcruxes destroyed. Confederation verdict delivered. Sirius free. McGonagall as headmistress. Voldemort diminished but not gone, likely months before he attempts something, possibly longer given the anchor loss. I'll handle it when he does. The foundation is built. Thank you for building it with me. He received a reply 3 days later, which was Ragnok's usual response time for letters that weren't urgent and didn't require him to pretend urgency. Foundation construction was mutual. The building that goes up on it is yours. Art below that, in Copperlock's more angular script, a single line, don't break anything expensive this time. Harry read it in the common room and felt something that started in his chest and moved outward to the edges of him, not triumph, not quite, not the sharp flash of it. Something steadier. Something with more duration than triumph, less brittle than victory. The feeling of standing in a place you built and recognizing it as yours. Neville came down the stairs and dropped into the chair across from him with the comfortable unceremoniousness of someone who'd stopped worrying about timing. He had a letter in his hand that he'd clearly been carrying around all day. Longbottom Trust Vault, Neville said. Gran just told me. Gringotts found, there were bindings on me too. He held Harry's gaze. Not as many. Nothing like yours. But there were bindings. Gran thought they were protective. They might have been partially protective. He paused. But they were also suppressive. Harry looked at him steadily. Ragnok wrote to my Gran last week, Neville said. He said as a related finding to the Potter investigation they'd noticed anomalous binding patterns in a second subject who had potential prophetic relevance. He turned the letter over in his hands. She wants me to go in. This summer. Do you want to go? Harry asked. Yes, Neville said, with the simple directness of someone who'd spent 14 years being told he was less than he was and had just found out there was documentation to back up the feeling. I want to know what I am without them. I can come with you, Harry said. If you want. Or I can give you Ragnok's direct correspondence and you can go on your own. He paused. Either is fine. It should be your thing. Neville was quiet for a moment. Come with me, he said. First visit. Then I'll go on my own. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone building something and knowing it. You'll like what you find, Neville. I'm fairly sure of that. You can't know that, Neville said. I know you, Harry said. That's sufficient. Summer exams came and went, and Harry's results were the results of someone who understood what they'd learned and had nothing to prove about it. Flitwick gave him his charms mark with an expression of barely contained academic joy. McGonagall's transfiguration mark came with a note that said simply, satisfactory. Don't get complacent. Which was, from McGonagall, the equivalent of a standing ovation. Snape's potions mark was excellent and came with no note, which Harry had come to understand was Snape's version of a compliment. He had one conversation with Dumbledore. Not sought, Dumbledore wrote and asked if Harry would be willing to meet, privately, once more, and Harry had considered it for 3 days before writing back, yes. He went to the office on a Thursday morning in June when the school was quiet with the winding down of term. The portraits were awake this time, no pretending. They watched with the frank curiosity of people who understood that they were present at something significant. Dumbledore was behind the desk, not performing anything. No managed warmth. He looked like a man who'd had several weeks of sitting with the full weight of consequences and hadn't been avoiding them. Harry sat down. "Thank you for coming," Dumbledore said. "You asked," Harry said. A pause. "Then, I wanted to say, without the chamber and the panel and the observers, what I said there was true. It was wrong. The intention behind it was real and the wrongness of it was also real, and I held both of those things for 13 years, and I chose, consistently, to let the intention outweigh the wrongness." He held Harry's gaze with the clear eyes of someone not looking away from their own account. "That was a failure." Harry waited. "I also want to say," Dumbledore continued, "that what you have done, what you have built, and how you built it, and what you are, none of that is what I planned for. All of it is better." He paused. "I wanted to tell you that." Harry looked at him for a long moment. He thought about what he'd felt at 5 when Ragnok explained what had been taken. He thought about what he'd felt at 11 when he'd sat in this office for the first time and matched Dumbledore question for question. He thought about the graveyard, and the chamber, and the Horcruxes lined up on Bonebreaker's table, and his mother's magic still running through his blood. He thought about what anger would cost him and what clarity had given him. "I know you believed it was necessary," Harry said. "I understand the logic. I understand the war context and the prophecy and the calculation." He paused. "I also think the calculation was wrong. I think if you told me the truth at any point, brought me in, explained it, asked me, I would have helped. I was 5 when I started planning for this. I was capable." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "You didn't give me the choice because you were afraid I'd make the wrong one. That's what I can't, not forgive. I don't think forgiveness is mine to offer right now, but that's what I can't resolve. You didn't trust me to choose." Dumbledore was very still. "No," he said. "I didn't." He said it plainly, with the weight of someone hearing an accusation they've already leveled at themselves and finding it still accurate. "That was the worst part of it. Not that I thought you incapable, I could see, even then, even with the bindings, what you were. It was that the choice wasn't mine to give, and I gave it to myself anyway." Harry nodded. He stood. "Voldemort is still out there," he said. "Not for long, but he's there. When he makes his move, I'm going to finish it. On my terms." He looked at Dumbledore. "If you have information that would help with that, information you've been holding because you were managing how and when I receive things, I'd like it." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Then he opened the desk drawer and produced a pensieve and 6 vials of memory and placed them on the desk. "I was going to give you these this year," he said. "The original plan." A pause. "I think you'll find them more useful now than I would have made them under the original plan." Harry looked at the memories. He picked them up, 6 vials in 2 hands, and put them in his bag. "Thank you," he said. He was at the door when Dumbledore said, quietly, "For what it's worth, Harry." "I know," Harry said. "I know it was worth something." He looked back. "That's the complicated part, isn't it? It was worth something and it was wrong at the same time, and I have to hold both of those, the same way you did." He paused. "I'm going to need some time to work out how." He walked down the spiral staircase and through the corridor and out into the summer morning, and the sky over Hogwarts was the particular blue of a Scottish June, clear and deep and enormous. He stood in the courtyard with his face tilted up to it for a moment and breathed it in and felt his magic settle in his chest like a tide coming in, full and even and entirely without constraint. He was 14 years old. He had a godfather in Edinburgh and a defense textbook in progress and 2 friends who'd saved him dinner and a goblin curse breaker who'd written the word mutual in a letter that Harry had read 4 times. He had memories in 6 vials that would tell him how to finish what he'd started, and a wand of elderwood and thunderbird feather that fit his hand like it had always been there because it had always been built for him. Voldemort would come. Probably before Christmas, probably with whatever he'd managed to construct in the absence of his anchors, probably furious and diminished and more dangerous for the Fury. Harry would be ready for him the way Harry was ready for everything, completely, practically, without drama, having thought about it longer than the problem had known Harry was thinking about it. He would not be a symbol. He would not be a weapon. He would not be a sacrifice or a savior or a narrative someone else had written. He would be exactly what he'd been building towards since he was 5 years old in a cold marble hall, looking at a goblin holding an instrument full of what his magic looked like, warm and fierce and blue as deep water. He would be himself. Fully, finally, irreversibly himself. He walked across the courtyard toward the castle to find his friends, and the morning was good, and the magic in his bones was steady, and the world that had been stolen from him piece by piece for 13 years was given back now, not by Dumbledore, not by anyone's grace or decision or allowance. He'd taken it back. Every piece of it.